It's the Midnight Narrator here. Before we start, I just want to say, I know you're probably lying there in the dark right now, phone glowing, maybe a little restless, maybe a little too awake. I get it. That's why we're here together. So here's the deal. If this story keeps you company through the small hours, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. It helps more than you'd think, and honestly, it tells me you want more nights like this. All right, let's begin. This story isn't about monsters in the traditional sense. It's about the ones that look like us, the ones we let in. Her name was Claire Duval, and on the morning she met him, she'd been trying very hard not to think about the fact that her life had fallen apart 6 months earlier. The book fair in Ashford, a town barely large enough to deserve the name, had seemed like a safe bet. Small, quiet, the kind of place where you could browse tables of used paperbacks and local crafts without anyone asking too many questions about why you'd moved to the middle of nowhere. Claire had rented a small cottage on the edge of town after the divorce, using what little savings she'd scraped together from her years teaching high school English in Richmond. She told herself it was temporary, a reset. Time to figure out who she was when she wasn't trying to be the person Daniel had wanted her to be. The fairground smelled like kettle corn and old paper. September in the Blue Ridge Mountains meant the mornings came with a chill that burned off by noon, and Claire had worn a cardigan that was too thick and boots that pinched her heels. She'd been standing in front of a table of vintage nature guides, the kind with hand-drawn illustrations of edible plants and animal tracks, when she heard the voice behind her. "That one's wrong about morels, by the way." She turned. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that needed a trim and a flannel shirt worn soft from use. Not handsome in the way Daniel had been, no sharp jawline or carefully maintained stubble, but there was something about his face that made you want to keep looking. Maybe it was his eyes. They were pale gray, almost colorless, and they didn't waver when they met hers. "Sorry," Claire said. He nodded toward the book in her hands. "Page 47 says you can find morels near dead elms in early spring. That's true, but it doesn't mention you've got to watch for false morels. They'll make you sick as hell. Author probably never foraged a day in his life. Just copied from other books." Claire glanced down at the page, then back up at him. "You forage?" "I live out here. Not much choice." He smiled, and it softened his entire face. "I'm Thorne. No first-name jokes, please. My mother had a weird sense of humor." "Claire." She shook his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, warm. "You live around Ashford?" "About 8 miles north, up past where the paved road stops." He tilted his head toward the mountains. "You're new here. I'd remember you." It wasn't a line. At least, it didn't feel like one. He said it the way you'd say, "It's going to rain later." Just a fact. "I moved here in April," Claire said. She didn't elaborate. Most people didn't push. Thorne didn't push either. Instead, he asked if she liked hiking, and when she admitted she'd only done a few short trails since moving, he told her about a place called Crow's Ledge, where you could see 3 states on a clear day. He described it the way other people described paintings, the light at dawn, the way the fog clung to the valleys, the silence so deep you could hear your own heartbeat. "You should go," he said, "before it gets too cold." "Maybe I will." He bought her a cup of coffee from the vendor near the entrance, and they walked the fair together. He knew which vendors sold actual handmade goods and which ones were reselling mass-produced stuff from online. He showed her a table run by an old woman who made tinctures from wild-crafted herbs, and he bought a small bottle of elderberry syrup, explaining it was good for winter colds. When Claire asked what he did for a living, he said he did odd jobs, carpentry, some guiding for tourists, a little freelance writing for outdoors magazines. Enough to get by, he said. I'm not interested in getting rich, just want to live quietly. It sounded nice. It sounded honestly like exactly what Claire wanted too. They exchanged numbers before she left. He didn't text her that night or the next day, and Claire told herself she didn't care. But on the third day, her phone buzzed with a message, Crow's Ledge, this Saturday, I'll bring coffee. She said yes. The hike was beautiful. Thorne knew the trail the way some people knew their childhood home. Every switchback, every root that jutted across his path, every place where the trees opened up just enough to catch a view. He pointed out animal tracks in the soft mud near a creek, showed her wild ginger growing in the shade. When they reached the ledge, he poured coffee from a dented thermos, and they sat on a flat rock, looking out over the endless roll of mountains. I forget sometimes, Claire said quietly, that places like this exist. Thorne glanced at her. What do you mean? I spent so long in the city, everything's loud. Even when it's quiet, it's not really quiet. You know? He nodded. That's why I left. Couldn't take it anymore. Where were you before? Nowhere worth talking about. He said it lightly, but something in his tone made it clear the subject was closed. Claire didn't press. She understood the need to leave things behind. They hiked together 3 more times over the next month. On the 4th hike, he kissed her at the trailhead as the sun set, and it felt inevitable, like the story had been moving toward that moment since the book fair. He tasted like coffee and wood smoke. By November, she was spending more nights at his place than her own. Thorne's cabin sat at the end of a long gravel road that turned to mud when it rained. It was small, just 2 rooms and a loft, but he'd built most of it himself, and you could see the care in every beam and joint. The walls were lined with bookshelves he'd made from reclaimed barn wood. A cast-iron stove dominated one corner. There was no Wi-Fi, but there was a hand pump well and a propane generator for the few things that needed power. It's not much, he'd said the first time she stayed over. It's perfect, Claire had said, and meant it. She loved the rhythms of his life, the way he woke before dawn and made coffee on the stove, the way he chopped wood in the mornings, methodical and steady, stacking it in neat rows against the side of the cabin. He cooked simple meals, venison stew, cornbread, roasted vegetable from a small garden he kept, and they ate by candlelight because he said electric lights hurt his eyes at night. You hunt the deer yourself? Claire asked one evening, watching him stir a pot on the stove. Yeah, bow, mostly. Quieter. He tasted the stew, added a pinch of salt. I try to use everything. Feels wrong not to. She admired that about him, the self-sufficiency, the respect for the land. By January, she'd given up the lease on her cottage. You're sure? Thorne had asked when she told him. I'm sure. He'd kissed her forehead, slow and careful, and said, Okay, then welcome home. It felt like the ending of one story and the beginning of another. Claire had no idea how true that was. Chapter 2. The Settling. Winter in the mountains wasn't like winter in the city. There were no plows that came at 4 a.m., no salt trucks, no neighbors shoveling their driveways in unison. When it snowed, and it snowed often, the world simply stopped. The gravel road became impassable. The cabin sat in a pocket of silence so complete that Claire sometimes found herself holding her breath just to hear if anything else was out there. Thorne didn't seem to mind. If anything, he seemed more at ease when they were snowed in. "No distractions," he'd say, pulling her close on the couch they'd dragged near the stove. "Just us." And it was just them, for weeks at a time sometimes. Claire's phone rarely had signal up here, which had bothered her at first. She'd check it compulsively those early days, watching the single bar flicker in and out, wondering if anyone from her old life was trying to reach her, but no one ever did. Her mother had stopped calling after Claire refused to come home for Thanksgiving. Her two close friends from Richmond had sent a few texts in the beginning. "Hey, you okay? We miss you." But when Claire's responses grew shorter and less frequent, they drifted away. Daniel had tried once, a rambling voicemail about needing closure, and she deleted it without listening to the whole thing. By February, she stopped checking the phone altogether. Life became smaller, simpler. The cabin, the woods, Thorne, that was the world. She learned his routines. He woke at 5:30 every morning, even in the dead of winter, made coffee, fed the stove. Sometimes he'd go out to check his traps. He had a line running through the forest for rabbits and the occasional fox, though he said he mostly let the foxes go. "Too pretty to kill unless you have to," he'd told her. Other mornings he'd disappear into the shed out back, the one he kept locked, and she'd hear the buzz of a saw or the rhythmic thunk of a hammer. He was always building something, fixing something. "What are you working on out there?" she asked once, pulling on her boots to join him. "Just a project," he said, stepping into the doorway to block her view. He smiled, but his body language was clear. "Nothing interesting. I'll show you when it's done." She didn't push. Everyone needed their own space. God knew she'd hated it when Daniel used to hover over her while she graded papers, asking what she was writing, why she was taking so long. So she gave Thorne his shed, and he gave her the loft, where she'd set up a small desk near the window. She'd started writing again, nothing serious, just journals, little sketches of ideas for the novel she'd always told herself she'd write someday. It felt good, like she was becoming someone again. In the evenings, they cooked together. Thorne was teaching her things: how to render fat from a deer, how to cure meat in the cold shed, how to make soap from lye and tallow. He had a way of explaining things that made her feel capable instead of stupid. Not like Daniel, who'd sigh when she asked questions, like she should already know. "You're a good teacher," she told him one night, as they worked side by side, her hands slick with ground venison as she formed patties for the skillet. "You're a good student," he said, and kissed the top of her head. The venison was always plentiful. She commented on it once, how much meat he seemed to have stored away, even though he said the hunting had been slow this year. "I got lucky in the fall," he'd said. "Big buck. Processed the whole thing." That made sense. She didn't know much about hunting. The stew became her favorite meal. He made it at least twice a week, rich and thick, with root vegetables from the cellar and chunks of tender meat that fell apart under her fork. There was something almost meditative about eating it on cold nights. The two of them curled together near the stove, the wind howling outside. He always made extra and jarred the leftovers, lining them up on the shelves in the cellar like little amber treasures. "You could sell this," Claire joked once. "Open a restaurant." Thorne had laughed, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I like keeping it just for us." March came, and with it the thaw. The road became passable again, and Thorne started making trips into town for supplies. He'd leave early in the morning, take his truck down the mountain, and return by late afternoon with bags of flour, coffee, propane tanks, the occasional book he thought she'd like. "You want to come next time?" he asked once, unloading a bag of rice. "Maybe," Claire said, though she didn't really mean it. Town felt far away now, loud, unnecessary. But one afternoon in early April, she'd run out of the tea she liked, a chamomile blend she ordered online before the internet became something she barely thought about. And she asked if he'd pick some up. "Sure," Thorne said. "Anything else?" "Maybe some eggs? I thought I'd bake something." He nodded, kissed her forehead, and left. He didn't come back until well after dark. When he finally walked through the door, Claire was already in bed, reading by candlelight. She heard him moving around downstairs, the clink of jars, the creak of the cellar door, then his footsteps on the ladder to the loft. "Sorry," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Took longer than I thought." "It's fine," she said, setting the book aside. "Did you get the tea?" "Yeah, it's downstairs." He pulled off his boots, and she noticed his jeans were damp at the knees, like he'd been kneeling in mud. There was a smudge of something dark on his wrist. "You okay?" she asked. He glanced at his wrist, rubbed it absently. "Yeah, just helped a guy with a flat tire on the way back. Got messy." "That was nice of you." He needed help. Thorne lay down beside her, pulling her close. His hands were cold. "You smell good." She laughed softly. "I smell like wood smoke and old books." "Exactly." They lay there in the quiet, and Claire felt his heartbeat against her back, steady even, calm. She was almost asleep when he spoke again, his voice low and drowsy. "I love you, Claire." It was the first time he'd said it. She turned to face him in the dim light. His eyes were soft, unguarded. "I love you too," she said, and she meant it. But later, much later, when everything unraveled, she'd remember that night, the mud on his jeans, the dark smudge on his wrist, the way he'd held her just a little too tight, like he was afraid she'd disappear. She'd remember, and she'd wonder if some part of her had known even then, if some part of her had chosen not to see. Chapter 3. The Posters. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains, like it wasn't quite sure it was welcome. The snow receded in patches, leaving behind dead grass and mud that sucked at your boots. The trees stayed bare longer than Claire expected, skeletal against gray skies, and the forest had a raw, exposed quality that made her feel like she was seeing something she wasn't supposed to. Thorne seemed restless. She noticed it in small ways at first. The way he'd stand at the window in the mornings, coffee mug in hand, staring out at the tree line for minutes at a time without speaking. The way he'd check the doors at night, front and back, sometimes twice. even though they were miles from anyone. Once, she woke at 2 a.m. to find his side of the bed empty. She climbed down from the loft and found him sitting at the table in the dark, just sitting there, hands folded, staring at nothing. "Hey," she'd whispered, "you okay?" He'd startled, actually flinched, before his face smoothed into something calmer. "Yeah, sorry, couldn't sleep. Bad dream? Something like that." He'd come back to bed, wrapped himself around her, and within minutes his breathing had evened out. But Claire had lain awake for a long time after that, listening to the silence of the cabin and wondering what he'd been thinking about in the dark. In late April, she went into town alone for the first time in months. It wasn't planned. Thorne had been in the shed all morning, and she'd been reading on the porch when she realized she was out of the notebooks she liked, the cheap composition ones with the marbled covers. She'd gone through 3 of them already, filling them with fragments of scenes and character sketches, and she wanted to keep the momentum going. "I'm heading into Ashford," she'd called toward the shed. "Need anything?" Thorne appeared at the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. There was sawdust in his hair. "I can go." "It's fine. I need to get out for a bit, stretch my legs." Something passed across his face, quick, hard to read. Then he nodded. "Okay, be careful on the roads. They're still pretty rough after the melt." "I will." She took his truck, the old Ford that rattled on the curves and smelled like motor oil and pine needles. The drive took 25 minutes, winding down from the ridge through thick forest that opened up into patchy farmland, and then finally the handful of streets that made up Ashford proper. The town looked different than she remembered, smaller, maybe, dingier, or maybe she'd just been away long enough that her brain had romanticized it. The general store was still there, and the post office, and the diner with the hand-painted sign that said Maisie's in faded red letters. She parked on Main Street and walked toward the store, hands in her jacket pockets. That's when she saw the posters. They were taped to the telephone pole outside the post office, 3 of them overlapping, the paper curled at the edges from weather, black and white photocopies, the ink blurred in places, missing. The first one showed a young woman, maybe mid-20s, with long dark hair and a wide smile. Kayla Hendricks, last seen March 15th near Blue Ridge Parkway, if you have any information. The second was a man, older, bearded, wearing a baseball cap. Joel Pritchard, missing since February 8th. Last known location, trail parking lot off Route 211. The third was another woman, blonde this time, early 30s. Amy Navarro disappeared April the 2nd after hiking alone near Hawksbill Summit. Claire stood there for a long moment, staring at the faces. 3 people, all within the last few months, all last seen near hiking trails. A cold thread of something worked its way down her spine. She told herself it didn't mean anything. People got lost in the mountains all the time. They wandered off trail, got turned around, fell, hit their heads. The wilderness didn't forgive mistakes. She'd read about it when she first moved here, how every year a handful of hikers just vanished. Some were found eventually, most weren't. Still, she couldn't stop looking at Amy Navarro's face. There was something about her smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners like she'd been mid-laugh when the photo was taken. Awful, isn't it? Claire turned. An older woman stood behind her, holding the reusable grocery bags. She had gray hair cut short and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Sorry?" Claire said. The woman nodded toward the posters. "Those pool people, that's 3 just this year. 4 if you count the boy from last October, but he was from out of state. Pennsylvania, I think." "Do they know what happened?" The woman shook her head. "Search and rescue did sweeps. Found nothing. It's like they walked into the woods and just disappeared." She sighed. "My husband says it's the mountains. Says people don't respect how easy it is to die out here. But I don't know. 3 and 4 months? That's more than usual." Claire felt her stomach tighten. "Yeah, that does seem like a lot. You live around here?" "Up past Ashford, with my boyfriend." "Well, you be careful if you're hiking. Don't go alone, and tell someone where you're going." The woman shifted her grocery bag to her other hand. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to be morbid. It's just, you hear things, you know. Small town. People talk." "What do they say?" The woman hesitated, then lowered her voice slightly, even though the street was empty. "Some folks think it's not accidents. They think someone's out there. Hunting." The word landed like a stone in Claire's chest. "Hunting," she repeated. "I know how it sounds, but think about it. 3 experienced hikers all gone without a trace. No bodies, no evidence, nothing." The woman shrugged. "I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying that's what people are whispering about." She wished Claire a good day and walked off, leaving her alone with the posters. Claire stared at them for another minute, then forced herself to turn away and head into the store. She bought the notebooks, a box of tea, some flour and sugar, but her hands felt clumsy on the checkout counter, and she kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see Thorne's truck pulling up outside. On the drive back, she told herself she was being paranoid. Thorne wasn't hunting people. That was insane. He was gentle. He made her coffee in the mornings and read to her at night, and held her like she was something precious. He wouldn't. But then she remembered the mud on his jeans, the dark smudge on his wrist. Helped a guy with a flat tire. She remembered the way he'd held her that night, too tight. "I love you, Claire." She remembered the locked shed, the way he'd never let her inside, the jars and jars of preserved meat lining the cellar shelves, even though he said hunting had been slow. No. She was doing what she always did, looking for problems where there weren't any. Daniel used to accuse her of that. "You overthink everything, Claire. You make up scenarios in your head and then get upset about them." By the time she turned onto the gravel road leading up to the cabin, she'd almost convinced herself she was being ridiculous. Almost. Thorne was on the porch when she pulled up, leaning against the railing with his arms crossed. He smiled when she got out, but it didn't reach his eyes. "How was town?" he asked. "Fine. Quiet." She grabbed the bags from the passenger seat. "Got your flour." "Thanks." He took one of the bags from her, his fingers brushing hers. "You were gone a while." It wasn't an accusation. Not exactly. But there was something underneath it, a question he wasn't asking. "I stopped at the post office," Claire said. "Saw some missing person posters." Thorne went still, just for a second. Then he nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've seen those. 3 people since February." "It happens." He turned and headed inside, and she followed. "Mountains are dangerous. People don't realize that. The woman I talked to said some people think It's not an accident." Thorne set the bag on the counter and looked at her. His face was calm, but his eyes were unreadable. "What do you think?" Claire hesitated. "I don't know." He stepped closer, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand was warm, steady. People love a good conspiracy. Makes them feel like the world makes sense, you know? Like there's a reason for bad things. His thumb traced her jawline. But sometimes bad things just happen. That's scarier, I think. The randomness of it. "Yeah," Claire said quietly. "I guess so." He kissed her forehead. "I'm glad you're careful. I'll worry about you when you go out alone." "I'm fine." "I know, but still." He pulled her close, and she let herself sink into him, breathing in the familiar smell of wood smoke and soap. "Let's not think about it, okay? Let's just have a nice night." "Okay." They made dinner together, venison stew again because they had so much of it, and ate by candlelight. Thorne told her a story about a hawk he'd seen that morning, the way it had hung in the air like it was painted there. She laughed in the right places, touched his hand across the table. But later, lying in the loft, with his arm across her waist and his breathing deep and even, Claire stared at the ceiling and couldn't stop thinking about those faces on the posters. Kayla, Joel, Amy, and the woman's voice. Some folks think someone's out there, hunting. She told herself she was safe. She told herself Thorne would never hurt her. But for the first time since she'd moved in, she didn't quite believe it. Chapter 4. The Pattern. May brought wildflowers and longer days, and with them a kind of forced normalcy that Claire clung to like a life raft. She stopped going into town, told herself it was because she didn't need anything, but really it was because she didn't want to see those posters again, didn't want to hear what people were whispering. Out here, with just the two of them in the mountains and the quiet, she could almost pretend she'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. Thorne was different after that day, not dramatically. He didn't suddenly become cold or distant. It was subtler than that. He watched her more. Small things. Glancing up from his book when she moved around the cabin, asking where she was going when she stepped outside, even just to the porch. Once, she'd walked down to the creek that ran behind the property, maybe 100 yards from the cabin. And when she came back 20 minutes later, he was standing in the doorway waiting. "Didn't know where you went," he said. "Just the creek. Wanted to clear my head." "You should tell me. I worry." It should have felt sweet, protective, and maybe it was, but it also felt like a hand closing around something delicate. She started noticing other things, too. The way he'd positioned the cabin. You couldn't see it from the road, even in winter when the leaves were down. The way the shed sat at an angle that blocked the view from the main room. The fact that he'd never once suggested they go hiking with other people, even though there were group hikes posted at the general store every weekend. "Do you have friends around here?" she asked one evening while they were washing dishes. He paused, hands in the soapy water. "Not really. I'm not good with people. But you're good with me. You're different." He glanced at her, and his smile was soft, genuine. "You don't want me to be anything I'm not." It was a sweet thing to say, the kind of thing that should have made her feel special. Instead, she wondered what he meant by anything I'm not. The nightmares started in mid-May. Not every night, but often enough that she began to dread going to sleep. They were always variations on the same theme. She was lost in the woods, trying to find a way back to the cabin, but the trees kept shifting, and there was someone behind her. She never saw them, but she could hear footsteps, steady and patient, like whoever it was knew she'd tire eventually. She'd wake gasping, Thorne's arm already around her, his voice low and soothing in her ear. "Just a dream. You're safe. I've got you." And she'd believe him in those half-awake moments, sink back into sleep with his heartbeat against her spine. But in the morning, she'd remember the sound of those footsteps, and she wouldn't be sure. One afternoon in late May, while Thorne was out checking his trap line, Claire did something she'd been trying not to do for weeks. She went to the shed, not inside. She didn't have a key, and the padlock was heavy duty, the kind you'd need bolt cutters to break. But she walked around it, looking. It was bigger than she'd realized, maybe 12 by 12, with a pitched roof and small windows set high up near the eaves. The windows were covered from the inside with something dark, fabric or paint, she couldn't tell. She stood on tiptoe, trying to see through a gap at the corner of one window, but the covering was complete. No light, no glimpse of what was inside. There was a smell, though, faint but distinct, metallic and organic, like iron and earth mixed together. She'd smelled it before, she realized, sometimes on Thorne's clothes when he came back from the shed, a faint tang that clung to him until he showered. She told herself it was just tools, saw blades, motor oil, rust, but her hands were shaking when she walked back to the cabin. That night, she tried to be normal, made cornbread from scratch, the way Thorne liked it, set the table, poured him a glass of the whiskey he kept in the cabinet. When he came in from the shed, later than usual, closer to dark, she smiled and asked how his day was. "Good," he said, washing his hands at the sink. He scrubbed them hard, she noticed, twice. "Caught 2 rabbits, already cleaned them. We can have them tomorrow." "Sounds good." They ate. He told her about a fox he'd seen, bright red against the green, and how it had watched him for a full minute before disappearing into the brush. She laughed at the right moments, touched his hand, but when he went to take a shower, he always showered after working in the shed, she slipped down to the cellar. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for. Evidence? Of what? That he was exactly who he said he was, and she was losing her mind? The cellar was small and damp, with a dirt floor and wooden shelves along 2 walls. The jars were there, lined up neatly, dozens of them, filled with the deep brown stew and cuts of preserved meat. She picked one up, held it to the light of the lantern she'd brought down. The meat looked normal, dark, fibrous, packed in brine. Venison, like he'd always said. She set it down and moved along the shelf. More jars, a bin of potatoes starting to sprout, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. Everything you'd expect in a root cellar, except. In the far corner, under the bottom shelf, was a wooden crate, unmarked, lid loose. She crouched down and lifted it. Inside were maps, dozens of them, topographical maps of the surrounding mountains, some printed, some hand-drawn. Routes were marked in pencil, some crossed out, some circled, dates written in the margins, going back years, and next to the dates, initials, KH, 3L15 JP 28AN, 42. Claire's breath caught. Kayla Hendricks, Joel Pritchard, Amy Navarro, the missing people. Her hands were numb as she dug deeper. There were more initials, more dates. Some from last year, some from the year before. A dozen names, maybe more. At the bottom of the crate was a small notebook, the kind with a black cover and gridded pages. She opened it, and her vision tunneled. It was a log. Entries in Thorne's handwriting, neat, precise, methodical. October 12th, male, late 40s, solo hiker, responded to offer of trail advice, clean kill, process 1013, yield approx 140 Lebsound, February 8th, male, 50s, experienced backpacker, more cautious, required secondary approach, processed 2-9, yield approx 160 Halebehag, March 15th, female, mid-20s. Claire snapped the notebook shut. She was going to be sick. She shoved everything back into the crate, hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the lid. The maps, the notebook, the dates, the yield. She climbed the ladder out of the cellar and made it to the porch before her legs gave out. She sat down hard on the steps, head between her knees, trying to breathe. The stew, the jars and jars of meat. I try to use everything. Feels wrong not to. Oh God, she'd been eating. She vomited into the grass, retching until there was nothing left. And even then, her body kept trying to expel something that wasn't there anymore. Something that was already inside her, had been inside her for months. She heard the cabin door open behind her. Claire? Thorne's voice, calm, concerned. She couldn't look at him, couldn't move. Hey. He crouched beside her, hand on her back. You okay? You sick? I'm fine, she managed. Her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. Just something I ate. The irony of that statement hit her, and she almost laughed, almost screamed. Come inside, Thorne said gently. Let me get you some water. She let him guide her back into the cabin, his hand firm on her elbow, let him settle her on the couch, bring her a glass of water, press his palm to her forehead to check for fever. You're cold, he said. I'll build up the fire. She watched him move around the room, adding wood to the stove, adjusting the flue, and tried to reconcile this person with the words in that notebook, the maps with the circled routes, the dates that matched the missing posters. Clean kill. Processed. Yield. He brought her a blanket and tucked it around her shoulders, sat beside her on the couch and pulled her against his chest, and she let him because she didn't know what else to do. Couldn't think, couldn't process. Better? He asked after a while. Yeah. His hand stroked her hair, slow and rhythmic. You scared me. Thought something was really wrong. I'm okay. But she wasn't. She was sitting next to a man who had killed at least a dozen people, who had fed them to her, who had made her complicit without her knowledge, binding her to him in a way that was so profoundly violating she couldn't even begin to wrap her mind around it. And he was holding her like she was precious, like he loved her. Maybe he did. Maybe that was the worst part. Thorne, she said quietly. Yeah? Did you lock the cellar door? He went still, just for a moment. Then his hand resumed its stroking. Why do you ask? I thought I heard something down there earlier. Wanted to make sure it was closed. I'll check in a minute. His voice was easy, relaxed, but his body had gone tense against hers. She could feel it, the shift. He knew. She didn't know how, but he knew she'd been down there. You should rest, he said. I'll make you some tea. I'm not really. I insist. He kissed the top of her head and stood, moving toward the kitchen. Chamomile. It'll settle your stomach. Claire watched him fill the kettle, set it on the stove. His movements were calm, methodical, the same way he did everything, the same way he'd written those entries in the notebook. She needed to get out tonight while he was asleep. She'd take the truck, drive to town, go straight to the sheriff's office, and "You're thinking too loud," Thorne said, not turning around. "I can practically hear it from here." Her blood went cold. "I'm just tired," she said. "I know." He brought her the tea a few minutes later, crouched in front of her, and held the cup to her lips like she was a child. "Drink. It'll help." She took a sip. It tasted bitter, but maybe that was just her mouth. Everything tasted wrong now. "All of it," Thorne said gently. She drank, watched his eyes, tried to see the man she'd fallen in love with somewhere behind that pale gray gaze. "Good girl," he said, and took the empty cup. Within 10 minutes, the edges of the room started to blur. "Thorne, shh, it's okay." He lifted her easily, carried her toward the loft. "You just need to sleep. We'll talk in the morning." She tried to say something, tried to fight, but her limbs were heavy, unresponsive. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was his face above hers, sad and tender. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I really am, but I can't let you leave." Then nothing. Chapter 5. The Waken. Claire woke to gray light and the smell of coffee. For a moment, just a moment, everything was normal. She was in the loft, in bed, Thorne's side of the mattress empty, but still warm. Morning, another day. She stretched, her body heavy and sluggish, like she'd slept too deeply. Then she remembered. The cellar, the maps, the notebook. Yield approx. 140 Leobes. She sat up too fast and her head swam, nausea rolling through her in a wave. The tea. He'd drugged the tea. How long had she been out? The light looked like dawn, but weak, watery. Could be 6 a.m. Could be later. She heard movement downstairs, the clink of a mug being set on the table. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She needed to think, needed to, what? Run? There was nowhere to run to. The truck keys were downstairs. Her phone was... God, where was her phone? She hadn't seen it in weeks, hadn't needed it, hadn't wanted it. She'd let herself become so isolated, so dependent. "Claire?" Thorne's voice drifted up from below, calm, almost gentle. "I know you're awake. Come down, we should talk." She didn't move. "Please, I made coffee." The mundane absurdity of that statement almost made her laugh. I made coffee. Like they were going to discuss their weekend plans. Like he hadn't drugged her last night. Like she hadn't found evidence that he was a goddamn serial killer. But what choice did she have? She couldn't stay up here forever. And maybe if she could get him talking, she could find an opening, a chance. She climbed down the ladder on shaking legs. Thorne was sitting at the table, 2 mugs in front of him. He'd shaved, changed into a clean flannel shirt. He looked normal. Tired, maybe. Sad, but normal. "Sit," he said, nodding to the chair across from him. Claire stayed where she was, one hand on the ladder. "I want to leave." "I know. I'm going to leave." "No," he said quietly. "You're not." The certainty in his voice made her stomach drop. Not angry, not threatening, just factual. "You can't keep me here." "I can, actually." He took a sip of his coffee, watching her over the rim. "We're 8 miles from town, mostly uphill. You don't have keys to the truck. Your phone doesn't work out here even if you could find it, which you can't because I got rid of it months ago. You could try walking, but you'd have to get past me first, and then you'd be on foot in terrain you don't know, wearing shoes that aren't meant for distance. He set the mug down. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying it so you understand the reality. Claire's throat was so tight she could barely breathe. Someone will come looking for me. Who? He asked it gently, like he was genuinely curious. Your ex-husband who you haven't spoken to in a year? Your mother who you cut off? Those friends from Richmond who stopped calling? He shook his head. No one's coming, Claire. No one knows you're here. That's why it worked. The past tense of that sentence landed like a slap. You planned this, she said. I planned us. He stood slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. I saw you at that book fair, and I knew you were perfect, smart, lonely, running from something you didn't want to talk about, no real ties, no one who'd miss you right away. He took a step toward her. I didn't make you fall in love with me, Claire. That part was real. Don't. Her voice cracked. Don't you dare. It's true, I love you. That's why you're still here, why you'll stay here. Another step. The others, they were different, necessary but temporary. You're permanent. The others. She forced the words out. The people on those posters, the ones in your notebook. He nodded. I'm not going to lie to you. Not anymore. Yes, I killed them. Hearing him say it out loud, so calmly, so matter-of-factly, made her knees weak. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. Why? Because I had to. He said it like it was obvious. I'm not good at being around people, Claire. I never have been. They exhaust me, drain me, but I still need... He paused, searching for words. Connection, sustenance, purpose. The hunts give me that, and the meat... He gestured vaguely. Nothing goes to waste. I told you that from the beginning. It's respectful in a way. They become part of something, part of us. Claire's stomach heaved, but there was nothing left to throw up. You fed me. She couldn't finish the sentence. I know it's hard to understand right now, but think about it. Really think. He moved closer, and she backed up until she hit the wall. We've shared meals for months. You've taken them into your body. They're part of you now, part of us. That's intimacy, Claire. That's a bond that can't be broken. You're insane. Maybe. He didn't seem bothered by the accusation. Or maybe I just see things differently than most people. Either way, it doesn't change what we have. We don't have anything. You're a murderer. You drugged me. Her voice rose, cracking. You violated me in the worst possible way, and you think that's love? Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or frustration. I knew you'd react like this, he said quietly. That's why I didn't tell you, why I couldn't tell you. But now that you know, he spread his hands. Now we can be honest with each other. No more secrets. We can build something real. I'm leaving. She pushed off the wall, tried to move past him toward the door. He caught her wrist. Not hard, but firm. Immovable. No. Let go of me. I can't do that. They stood there, locked in place, and Claire saw her options narrowing to a pinpoint. She couldn't overpower him, couldn't outrun him, couldn't reason with him. She was trapped. What are you going to do? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Keep me here forever? Lock me up? I don't want to. He loosened his grip slightly, thumb stroking the inside of her wrist. I want you to choose to stay, to understand why this is right. It's not right, it's sick. Is it? He tilted his head. You love the life we built, the quiet, the simplicity, the way it was just us, with no one else to complicate things. You told me you felt more yourself here than you ever did in the city. That was before I knew you were killing people. But the feeling was real. The peace you felt, that was real. I gave you that. His eyes searched hers. I can keep giving you that. We can go back to how things were. You just have to let go of what you think you're supposed to feel and accept what you actually feel. Claire stared at him, at this man she'd shared a bed with, shared her body with, shared meals with, and tried to find something she recognized, some crack in the facade she could exploit. But all she saw was certainty. He actually believed what he was saying, believed they could just move past this, go back to normal. I need time, she said finally, to process, to think. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but you understand. I'll be watching. I love you, Claire, but I'm not stupid. You try to run. You try to hurt yourself. You try anything. I'll stop you. I don't want to restrain you, but I will if I have to. I understand. He let go of her wrist, and she resisted the urge to rub it. Didn't want to give him the satisfaction. I'll make us breakfast, he said, turning toward the kitchen like this was just another morning. You must be hungry. The thought of eating anything made her want to scream, but she nodded, sat down at the table, watched him move around the kitchen, cracking eggs, slicing bread, humming softly under his breath. Normal, so aggressively normal. And that's when Claire understood the real horror of her situation. It wasn't just that Thorne was a killer. It was that he was right about one thing. No one was coming for her. No one even knew she was here. She'd erased herself so thoroughly from her old life that she'd become invisible. She'd walked into this trap willingly, eagerly, because she'd been so desperate to escape her own life that she hadn't bothered to ask what she was escaping into. And now she was going to have to save herself, if she even could. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Thorne stayed close, not hovering, but present. He worked in the main room instead of going to the shed, sanding a piece of wood by the window while she sat on the couch pretending to read. Every time she moved, his eyes tracked her. When she went to use the outhouse, he followed her outside and waited by the door. Just making sure you're okay, he said when she came out. I'm fine. But she wasn't. She was cataloging, observing, looking for weaknesses. The truck keys hung on a hook by the door. Too obvious. He'd catch her before she got the engine started. There were knives in the kitchen, but he was bigger, stronger, and, she had to admit, probably faster. She'd never win a physical confrontation. The windows were small, the glass old and thick. She might be able to break one, but then what? 8 miles through the forest on foot, with him coming after her? She needed a better plan, a real opening. At dinner, vegetable soup, thank God, no meat. She tried to engage him, keep him talking. How long have you been doing this? The hunting? He looked up from his bowl, surprised she'd asked. Since I moved here, 6 years maybe? 7? And before that? I drifted, worked odd jobs, tried to be normal. He stirred his soup slowly. It didn't work. I'd get too close to people and the urge would come back, stronger each time. Out here, I could manage it, control it, channel it into something sustainable. Sustainable, Claire repeated, The word tasted like ash. It's not random, Claire. I'm careful. I choose people who won't be missed right away. Solo hikers, drifters, people passing through. I don't take locals. I don't take families. I have rules. Rules? She almost laughed. You have rules for murder. Everyone has rules. Mine just happen to be different than most people's. He reached across the table, tried to take her hand. She pulled away. His jaw tightened. You're judging me by standards that don't apply. You're thinking like someone who lives in the world out there. But we don't anymore. We live here, in our world. Different rules. That's not how reality works. Isn't it? He leaned back. What's real, Claire? The laws written by people you've never met? The morality taught to you by a culture that grinds people into paste and calls it civilization? Or what you feel right here, right now? The peace you had before you went digging where you shouldn't have? She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because part of her, a small, treacherous part, remembered what it felt like before. The quiet mornings, the simple routines, the feeling of being held at night like she mattered, and she hated herself for it. I'm tired, she said, standing. I'm going to bed. Thorne nodded. I'll be up in a bit. She climbed to the loft, lay down fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling beams. Listened to him moving around below. The clink of dishes, the creak of floorboards. Eventually, his footsteps on a ladder. He slid into bed beside her, and she went rigid. It's okay, he murmured. I'm not going to touch you, not until you're ready. They lay there in the dark, inches apart, and Claire focused on breathing, on not screaming, on not breaking down completely. I do love you, Thorne said quietly. I know you don't believe that right now, but I do. More than I've ever loved anything. She didn't respond. After a while, his breathing evened out, deepened. He was asleep. Claire waited, counted his breaths, 30, 60, 100. Then, slowly, carefully, she eased out of bed. She had to try. Even if it was hopeless, even if she failed, she had to try. Chapter 6. The first attempt. The ladder creaked. Claire froze, one foot on the third rung, hand gripping the side rail so hard her knuckles went white. Above her, Thorne's breathing hitched, just for a second, then resumed its steady rhythm. She waited. 10 seconds? 20? Nothing. She continued down, placing each foot with excruciating care, testing each rung before committing her weight. The cabin was dark except for the dying glow of embers in the stove, throwing just enough light to see shapes. The table, the chairs, the door, the hook where the keys hung, empty. Claire's heart dropped. She moved closer, running her hand along the wall where the hook was mounted, thinking maybe they'd fallen. Nothing. She checked the counter, the windowsill, the small shelf by the door. Gone. Of course, he'd moved them. Probably had. Them in his pocket right now, or hidden somewhere she'd never find. Her chest tightened. Okay. No truck, that was fine. She'd have to walk 8 miles in the dark through unfamiliar forest, but people did that, right? Hikers, runners. It was possible. She needed shoes, a coat, water if she could manage it without making noise. Her boots were by the door where she left them. She picked them up, held them against her chest, and moved toward the coat hooks. Her jacket was there, the one she'd been wearing the day she met him, back when everything had seemed so simple, so safe. She was reaching for it when she heard the sound, not from the loft, from outside, a soft scrape, metal on wood, coming from the direction of the shed. Claire went still, every nerve firing. Was someone else out there? Another hiker? Someone who could help? Or was it... The door to the cabin opened. She spun, and Thorne was standing there, fully dressed, holding a lantern. His face was calm, almost sad. "I knew you'd try," he said quietly. "I was just..." "Don't." He stepped inside, set the lantern on the table. "Please don't insult me by lying. We're past that now." Claire's mind raced. The open door was right there, maybe 6 feet away. Could she... "You won't make it," Thorne said, reading her body language. "I'm faster than you, and I know these woods. You'd be lost in 5 minutes, and then I'd have to track you down in the dark. I don't want to do that, Claire. I don't want to hurt you." "Then let me go." "I can't." "Yes, you can. You can just..." Her voice cracked. "You can just let me walk out that door and pretend you never saw me. I won't tell anyone. I'll disappear. You'll never hear from me again." He shook his head slowly. "You'd go straight to the police. I know you would. You're a good person. That's one of the things I love about you. You'd tell them everything, and then I'd be done. Everything I've built here, gone." "Good. You should be done. You've killed people, Thorne. She swallowed hard. "You've done things that can't be justified or explained away. You need to face consequences." "Consequences?" He said the word like it was foreign. "From people who've never felt what I feel. Who've never had to fight against something that lives inside them like a second heartbeat." He moved to the chair, sat down heavily. "You want to know the truth? I've tried to stop. Years ago, before I came here, I'd go months without hunting, white-knuckle through it. And you know what happened?" Claire didn't answer. "I broke," he continued, "completely. I hurt someone I cared about. Not like this, not intentional, but I lost control. That's when I understood I can't fight what I am. I can only manage it, channel it. And out here, I found a way to do that without destroying everything." He looked up at her. "Until you made me think maybe I could have more. Maybe I could have both." "You can't have both," Claire said, and she was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "You can't have love and murder in the same space. It doesn't work that way." "Why not?" The question was so genuine, so utterly devoid of irony, that Claire almost laughed. "Because love requires trust, safety. You've taken both of those from me. I can give them back." "No, you can't." She gripped her boots tighter, using them like an anchor. "Even if I stayed, even if I pretended everything was fine, I'd spend every moment waiting for you to decide I was a problem that needed solving, waiting to become like the others." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe. "You're not like the others. You're different, special. I know. That's what every killer says about the one who's supposed to be different." She took a shaky breath. "But the thing is, Thorne, I was different. I was someone who trusted you, loved you, and you destroyed that. You can't get it back by keeping me prisoner." For a long moment, he just looked at her. The lantern light made his pale eyes look almost colorless, unreadable. "What if I told you I'd stop?" he said finally. "No more hunts, no more killing, just us, living quietly. Would that be enough?" Claire wanted to believe him. God, some broken part of her actually wanted to believe he could change, that what they'd had was real enough to save. But she'd found that notebook, read those entries, Seen the methodical way he documented his kills like they were accounting ledgers. People like that didn't just stop. "I don't believe you," she said. He flinched, actually flinched like she'd hit him. "I would. For you, I would." "Prove it. Let me go." "I can't." "Then your words don't mean anything." They stood there in the semi-darkness, at an impasse. Claire's legs were shaking with adrenaline, her mind spinning through possibilities. The door was still open. He was sitting. If she just ran... "Claire!" His voice was gentle but firm. "Come, sit down, please. We're both tired, and this isn't going anywhere. I'm not staying here. You don't have a choice." He stood, and she backed toward the door. "I'm sorry, I really am, but you don't have a choice." She bolted out the door, into the darkness, boots still clutched against her chest. She heard him behind her, not running, just following at a steady pace, and she ran harder, bare feet, hitting cold dirt and pine needles and rocks that bit into her soles. The forest was a wall of black, no moon, no stars, just trees and shadows, and the sound of her own breathing. Behind her, steady as a metronome, footsteps, not fast, not panicked, just patient. She veered left, thinking she could lose him, but the ground sloped suddenly, and she went down hard, tumbling through underbrush, her shoulder slamming into something solid. A tree, a rock. Pain exploded up her arm. "Claire." His voice was close, too close. She scrambled up, tried to run again, but her ankle twisted, and she went down again. This time, sliding several feet down a muddy incline before catching herself on a root. Footsteps, getting closer, then light. The lantern, swinging gently in his hand as he made his way down the slope toward her. "You're hurt," he said, crouching beside her. "Let me see." "Don't touch me." But he was already checking her ankle, his hands gentle, professional. "It's not broken, just a sprain. You're lucky." She tried to pull away, but the movement sent pain shooting up her leg and she gasped. "Stop fighting," Thorne said quietly. "You're only making it worse." He lifted her. She tried to resist, but her body was done, exhausted, pain screaming from a dozen places, and carried her back toward the cabin. The trees seemed to close in around them, and Claire realized with sick certainty that even if she'd made it farther, she had no idea which direction town was. She'd been completely, utterly lost within 30 seconds of leaving. He'd been right. She wouldn't have made it. Back in the cabin, he set her on the couch and brought water, bandages, the bottle of aspirin from the cabinet. He cleaned the cuts on her feet with surprising gentleness, wrapped her ankle, covered her with the blanket she'd kicked off earlier. "I'll make us tea," he said. "No." Her voice came out hoarse. "No more tea?" He paused, then nodded. "Okay, water then, and you should eat something." "I'm not hungry." "You need to keep your strength up." He moved to the kitchen, and she heard him opening cabinets, the clink of a bowl. "I'll make oatmeal. Plain. Nothing you need to worry about." She watched him cook. This man who'd killed at least a dozen people, who'd fed her their remains, who'd just hunted her through the forest like prey. And now he was making her breakfast. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. "Why?" she asked. "Why go through all this? Why not just kill me too?" He turned, and the look on his face was genuinely confused. "Because I love you. I told you that. This isn't love. What is it then?" She didn't have an answer, couldn't find words for what this was, this twisted, suffocating thing that wore love's face and spoke in its voice, but had something rotten underneath. He brought her the oatmeal, plain like he'd promised, with a little honey, and sat across from her while she ate, watched her with those pale, unreadable eyes. "I'm going to add a lock to the loft ladder," he said conversationally, "just until you adjust. I don't want you hurting yourself again." "A lock. Temporary. Once you understand that running isn't an option, that we can make this work, I'll take it off." Claire set down the bowl, her appetite gone. "You're going to lock me in? Only at night. During the day you'll have the run of the cabin. I trust you not to do anything foolish." He leaned forward. "I'm not a monster, Claire. I'm trying to make this as comfortable as possible for you, but you have to meet me halfway. You have to stop fighting." "Or what?" His expression darkened slightly. "Let's not find out." The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. She was running out of options, and they both knew it. Dartoam, Chapter 7, The Adjustment. The lock went up the next morning. Claire watched from the couch, ankle propped on a pillow, as Thorne installed it at the base of the ladder. A simple slide bolt, the kind you'd use on a bathroom door. Nothing fancy, but effective enough when the only way down was a 12-foot drop onto hardwood. "I'll leave it open during the day," he said, testing the mechanism. "You have my word." His word. Like that meant anything now. Her ankle throbbed. The cuts on her feet stung. But worse than the physical pain was the exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd fought and lost and didn't know what fight was even left. She'd tried running, failed. She'd tried reasoning, failed. What the hell was she supposed to do now? The days blurred together after that. Thorne kept his promise about the lock. During daylight hours, the bolt stayed open. She could move around the cabin, use the outhouse, sit on the porch. But he was always there, always watching, not obviously. He'd work on his projects, read, tend to things around the property. But she could feel his attention like a physical weight. At night, she'd hear the bolt slide home, that soft metallic click that meant she was caged until morning. She stopped sleeping well, would lie awake staring at the ceiling, listening to him breathe beside her. Sometimes she'd catch herself studying his face in the darkness, the slope of his nose, the line of his jaw, and trying to reconcile it with what she knew he'd done, trying to find a monster underneath. But he just looked like a man, a tired, complicated man who occasionally smiled in his sleep. It made her want to scream. A week passed, maybe more. Time felt slippery, hard to hold on to. Her ankle healed, the cuts on her feet scabbed over. Thorne brought her books from his shelves. Nothing she asked for, just things he thought she'd like. Poetry, nature essays, a battered copy of Watership Down that had obviously been read many times. "My mother gave me this," he said, handing it to her. "Before she died. It's about survival, about finding home when everything's against you." Claire took the book, but didn't open it. Didn't want to think of him as someone who'd had a mother, someone who'd been a child once, reading about rabbits and courage. She wanted him to stay a monster. It was easier that way, but he wouldn't cooperate. He'd make her coffee in the mornings exactly how she liked it. Would ask if she wanted to sit on the porch, breathe the mountain air. Would tell her about the birds he'd seen that day, or the fox that kept appearing near the shed, bold as anything. "I think it's nesting nearby." He said one afternoon, his face animated in a way she hadn't seen since before. Probably has kits. You can tell by the way she moves, more cautious, always looking back toward the same spot. And Claire heard herself ask, "Where?" Saw his face light up. Hated herself for giving him that. 2 weeks in, something shifted. She was reading on the couch, actually reading, not just staring at pages, when Thorne came in from the shed. He looked tired, streaked with sawdust, but his eyes went to her immediately. "Good book?" he asked. "It's fine." She'd started Watership Down, despite herself. The rabbits were traveling through dangerous territory trying to find safety. She refused to think about the parallels. He poured himself water, drank it, standing by the sink. "I need to go into town tomorrow. Supplies." Claire's pulse jumped. "Okay. You'll stay here, obviously." "Obviously." He turned, leaning against the counter. "I'll be gone most of the day. I thought about locking you in the loft while I'm away, but—" He paused, weighing something. "I don't want to do that. It feels cruel." She said nothing, waited. "So I won't. You'll have the cabin to yourself." His eyes held hers. "But understand, if you try anything while I'm gone, if you try to leave, I'll know. I'll find you, and it'll be worse." "How? How will I know, or how will it be worse?" "Both." He smiled, but it was sad. "I know you, Claire. I know how you think, where you go, what you'd try. As for worse—" The smile faded. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if you force me to. I'll do what's necessary to keep you here. Do you understand?" She understood. God help her. She understood perfectly. "I won't try anything," she said. "Good." He pushed off from the counter. "I'm going to shower. Then maybe we can make dinner together. I got fresh vegetables last time. Thought we could do a stir-fry." He said it so casually, like they were a normal couple, like she wasn't his prisoner. Claire nodded. "Sure." And she helped him cook. Chopped vegetables while he heated the pan, their movement synchronized from months of practice. They ate at the table. He told her about a hawk he'd seen on his last trip to town. Massive thing with a white chest, probably hunting the fields near the road. She listened, responded, played the role. Because what else was there to do? That night, lying in the dark with the bolt locked and Thorne's breathing steady beside her, Claire stared at the ceiling and tried to remember who she'd been before. The woman who'd left Richmond, who'd rented that cottage, who'd thought a book fair on a September morning was a nice way to spend a Saturday. She felt so far away now, like someone Claire had known once but couldn't quite recall. Is this how it happened? Is this how people got broken down, rebuilt into something else? You didn't need torture, didn't need overt violence. You just needed time, isolation. Someone who was patient enough to wait for you to forget there was ever any other option. "I'm not giving up," she told herself. "This is temporary. I'm biding my time, waiting for an opening." But a small voice whispered back, "Or maybe you're just surviving. Maybe that's all this is now." She pushed the thought away, focused on the ceiling beams, counting them in the darkness until her eyes burned and exhaustion finally dragged her under. Thorne left for town just after dawn. Claire heard the truck start, listened to it rattle down the gravel road until the sound faded completely. Then she waited. 10 minutes, 20, making sure he wasn't coming back because he'd forgot something. Silence. She was alone. first thought was escape, but she'd learned her lesson about running blind. 8 miles through forest she didn't know, with no shoes that could handle the terrain, no food, no water, and he'd be back in 6, maybe 8 hours. She'd never make it to town before he came looking, but maybe she didn't need to run. Maybe she needed evidence, something she could use when she got out, something concrete that would put him away forever and make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. The shed. He'd been so careful to keep her away from it. And she'd found those maps in the cellar, but they were just maps, initials. Could be explained away as planning hiking routes, marking where he'd seen game. But the shed, that's where he'd said he processed things. That's where the smell came from. If there was real evidence, it would be there. Claire's hands were shaking as she tested the front door. Unlocked. Of course, why bother locking it when she was supposedly too scared to try anything? The morning was cold, mist hanging in the trees like torn fabric. Her breath plumed in front of her as she crossed the yard to the shed, each step feeling like it took an hour. The padlock hung open on the hasp. He'd left it unlocked. Claire's stomach clenched. Was this a test? A trap? Or had he really started to trust her? She pulled the door open. The smell hit her first, sharp and metallic, mixed with something chemical. Bleach, maybe, or lye. The interior was dim, light filtering through cracks in the walls, and it took a moment for her eyes to adjust. When they did, she wished they hadn't. The shed was set up like a butcher's workspace, a large steel table in the center, worn smooth from use, hooks hanging from the ceiling beams, saws of various sizes mounted on one wall, bone saws, she realized with sick certainty, and knives arranged by size on a magnetic strip, buckets, plastic sheeting folded in a corner, a large chest freezer against the back wall, humming softly. Everything was clean, meticulously clean. But there were stains on the concrete floor that no amount of bleaching could fully erase. Dark patches where the concrete had absorbed too much, too many times. Claire's legs felt like water. She forced herself to move deeper into the shed. Opened drawers, finding more tools, rubber gloves, garbage bags. She checked the walls for anything that could serve as proof. Photos, documentation, anything. The freezer. She didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, get out, pretend she'd never been here. But she had to know. The lid was heavy, and when she lifted it, cold air billowed out in a cloud. Inside, meat, wrapped in white butcher paper, labeled with dates and cuts. Shoulder, loin, ribs. She dug deeper, hands numb, pulling out package after package. Some of the dates went back months, a year, further. At the very bottom, wrapped separately in thicker plastic, was something that made her stomach drop. A hand, severed at the wrist, fingers curled slightly, frozen in whatever position it had been in when it was packed away. The skin was grayish-blue, nails still painted a chipped burgundy. Claire dropped it back into the freezer like it had burned her. This was real. This was evidence. Undeniable, concrete proof that the sound of a truck engine cut through her thoughts. No, it was too soon. He shouldn't be back for hours. But the sound was getting closer, grinding up the gravel road, and Claire slammed the freezer lid shut and ran. She made it back to the cabin, heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Threw herself onto the couch, grabbed the book she'd been reading, tried to slow her breathing. The truck stopped. Door slammed. Footsteps on the porch. The door opened, and Thorne walked in carrying a single bag of groceries. He looked at her, and his expression was unreadable. "Forgot the coffee," he said calmly. "The kind you like. Thought I'd come back for it before heading all the way to town." Claire's mouth was dry as bone. "That was nice of you." He set the bag on the counter, didn't move, just stood there, looking at her with those pale gray eyes that saw everything. "You've been outside," he said, not a question. "Just the porch," Claire managed. "Needed some air." He walked over, crouched in front of her, and took her hand. Turned it over. There was dirt under her fingernails, dirt that hadn't been there when he left. "Claire." His voice was soft, disappointed. "What did I tell you? I didn't try to leave, I swear. The shed." She froze. "You went in the shed." Still soft, still calm, but something dangerous underneath now. "Didn't you?" There was no point lying. He knew, had probably known the moment he saw her. "Yes," she whispered. He nodded slowly. Stood. "Okay. Thorne, it's okay." But his face said it wasn't okay, not even close. "I understand. You were curious. You needed to see for yourself." He walked to the door, closed it, locked it from the inside. "I get that. I really do. Please." "But now we have a problem." He turned back to her, and his expression made her blood turn to ice. "Because I gave you freedom, and you violated that. I trusted you, and you proved I was wrong too." "I'm sorry." "No, you're not. Not yet." He moved closer, and she pressed back into the couch. "But you will be." He reached down, pulled her to her feet, and despite her ankle being mostly healed, despite her ability to run, she didn't. Because she'd seen what was in that freezer, knew what he was capable of, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Claire understood that she might not survive this. "Upstairs," Thorne said quietly. "Now." She climbed the ladder on numb legs, heard the bolt slide home behind her, and then his footsteps climbing up after her. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Thorne didn't touch her. That was somehow worse. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands on his knees, and just looked at her for what felt like hours. Claire stood by the far wall, as far from him as the small loft would allow, her back pressed against rough wood, watching him watch her. "I don't want to hurt you," he said finally. She almost laughed. "Almost. Then don't. But you put me in an impossible position." He rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking exhausted. Older. "I tried to give you space, freedom. I thought if I showed you that I could be reasonable, that this didn't have to be—" He stopped, started again. "I thought you'd come around, given time." "Come around to what? Accepting that you're a serial killer, that you've been feeding me?" Her voice cracked. She couldn't say it again, couldn't put those words in her mouth. "I know how it looks." How it looks? The hysteria was bubbling up now, unstoppable. "I saw a hand, Thorne, a human hand in your freezer, with nail polish. Someone painted their nails and went for a hike, and you butchered them like an animal. She was already dead when I found her." The words hung in the air. Claire blinked. "What?" "Amy Navarro." He said the name carefully, like he was handling something fragile. "That's whose hand you saw. She fell near Hawksbill's summit, 40-foot drop onto rocks. Broke her neck. It was quick, clean." He looked down at his hands. "I was there, not hunting, just hiking, and I found her, still warm. So you, what, decided to just take her? The animals would have gotten to her anyway, bears, coyotes. She'd be scattered across half a mile of forest within a week. This way, he met her eyes. This way, she became something, sustained something. It felt respectful. Claire's mind reeled. You're insane. You know that, right? You're actually genuinely insane. Maybe. He didn't sound defensive, just resigned. But it's the truth. Amy was an accident. Joel, the one in February, he had a heart attack on the trail. I tried to help him, but he was gone before I could get back with my truck. The others, he paused. Some of them were different. I won't lie about that, but most of them, they were already dying. Hypothermia, injuries lost, and panicking. I made it easier, faster. You're saying you mercy killed them? Some of them, yes. And the rest? His jaw tightened. The rest were necessary. There it was. The truth underneath all the rationalizations. Some of them he'd killed outright, hunted, just like she'd thought. How many? Claire asked. How many did you actually hunt? Does it matter? Yes, it fucking matters. He was quiet for a long moment. 3. Over 6 years. 3 people who I actively pursued. Why those 3? They reminded me of someone. He said it so quietly she almost didn't hear. My father. The way he looked at me, the way he moved. I'd see them on the trails and I'd just... His hands clenched into fists. I'd lose time. And then it would be done. Claire felt like she was watching him through water. This man she'd loved, who she thought she knew, was a stranger, had always been a stranger. Your father, she said slowly. What did he do to you? Thorne's laugh was bitter, broken. What didn't he do? Started when I was 6, ended when I was 16, and big enough to fight back. He looked up, and his eyes were wet. I didn't kill him, in case you're wondering. He died of liver failure when I was 23. Alone in a VA hospital, I didn't even go to the funeral. I'm sorry that happened to you. And she was. God help her. Even knowing everything, some part of her still felt that. But it doesn't justify. I know it doesn't. You think I don't know that? His voice rose, raw and ragged. You think I haven't spent every day since I was 16 trying to understand why I'm like this? Why I can't just be normal? He stood, paced a small space. I've tried, Claire. I've tried so fucking hard. Therapy, medication, moving to places where there's no one around to trigger me. And it works. For a while. And then someone looks at me a certain way or says something in that tone, and I'm 6 years old again, hiding in a closet, praying he won't find me. He stopped, breathing hard, and Claire saw him clearly for the first time. Not a monster, just a deeply, irrevocably broken person who'd been breaking other people to hold himself together. You need help, she said. Real help. Not isolation and self-justification. You need to turn yourself in. So I can spend the rest of my life in a cage? He shook his head. I've already been in a cage. I'm not going back. Then what's the alternative? You keep me here forever? Keep killing people when the urge gets too strong? I told you, I'll stop. For you, I'll stop. You can't. I can. He moved closer, and she pressed harder against the wall. You don't understand. The reason I hunt, the reason I've needed to, is because I'm alone. Because there's nothing tethering me to anything real but you. His hand came up, almost touching her face, but stopping just short. You make me feel human. When I'm with you, when we're just existing together, I don't feel that thing inside me clawing to get out. You quiet it. That's not love, Thorn. That's using someone as a crutch. What's the difference? The question was so genuine, so utterly devoid of manipulation, that Claire almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The difference, she said carefully, is that love wants what's best for the other person, even if it costs you everything. What you're describing, that's need. Possession. That's keeping someone prisoner and calling it salvation. He stepped back like she'd slapped him. I'm trying, he said, and his voice broke on the word. I'm trying so hard to make this work, to be what you need. What the hell else do you want from me? I want you to let me go. I can't. Then we're done talking. Claire slid down the wall, sat on the floor, hugged her knees to her chest. Do whatever you're going to do. Lock me up, drug me, whatever. But stop pretending this is anything other than what it is. Thorn stood there, staring down at her, and for a moment she thought he might actually hurt her. His hands were shaking, his breathing was ragged, but then something in his face crumpled, and he turned away. I need to think, he said. I'll be back. He climbed down the ladder. She heard the bolt slide home. Then the cabin door opened and closed, and she was alone. Claire sat in the silence for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. He'd admitted to killing people. 3 directly, others indirectly. He'd told her about his father, about the thing inside him that he couldn't control. And he'd cried. Actual tears running down his face when he thought she wasn't looking. She should have felt vindicated, should have felt like she'd finally seen the truth of him. Instead, she just felt tired and trapped, and so far beyond what any reasonable person should have to endure that she couldn't even calibrate her own emotions anymore. Was she supposed to hate him, fear him, pity him? All of it felt too big, too complicated. She just wanted it to be over. The afternoon sun slanted through the loft window, and Claire closed her eyes against it. Thought about her mother, her friends, Daniel, all the people she'd pushed away because she thought she needed to be alone to figure herself out. She'd gotten her wish. She was alone, and look where it had gotten her. She must have dozed off because when she opened her eyes, the light had changed. Late afternoon, pushing toward evening, the cabin below was quiet. Too quiet. "Thorn?" she called. No answer. She stood, wincing at the stiffness in her ankle, and looked down through the loft opening. The main room was empty. The door was closed. He hadn't come back yet. How long had he been gone? An hour? 2? Claire's mind started working. This was an opportunity, maybe her only one. If she could get down from the loft, get outside, get a head start before he came back. But the bolt was locked. She'd heard it. Unless... She moved to the edge of the loft, examining the bolt from above. It was positioned just at the base of the ladder, secured to the floor with screws. If she had something long and thin, maybe she could reach down and slide it open. She searched the loft frantically. The bed, nothing useful. Her clothes, useless. The books. Wait. One of the books Thorn had given her was an old hardcover, the kind with those thin ribbon bookmarks sewn into the binding. She pulled it free, tested its length. Maybe 18 inches. Flexible, but strong. She lay on her stomach at the edge of the loft, ribbon in hand, and reached down. The angle was terrible, and her shoulders screamed in protest, but she could just touch the bolt with the tip of the ribbon. She hooked it, pulled gently. The bolt moved just a fraction. She pulled again. On a fourth try, it slid free. Claire didn't hesitate, scrambled down the ladder, grabbed her boots by the door, the hell with coats, the hell with supplies, and ran. Outside, the forest was painted in orange and gold, the sun setting behind the ridge. She ran toward the road, feet pounding gravel, lungs burning, waiting for the sound of the truck behind her, or his voice calling her name. Nothing. She kept running, made it to the bend in the road where the forest thickened. Looked back. The cabin sat quiet in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney. He wasn't following. Why wasn't he following? Claire forced herself to keep moving. Down the road, around another curve, legs screaming, ankle throbbing. But she couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. The sun was touching the horizon when she finally saw it. The truck, parked sideways across the road, blocking her path, and Thorne, leaning against the hood, arms crossed, waiting. "I knew you'd use the ribbon," he said calmly. "I left it for you." Claire stopped, swaying, breath coming in ragged gasps. "This was a test," she said. "Yes." "Did I pass?" He pushed off from the truck, walked toward her slowly. "I don't know yet. That depends on what you do next." She looked behind her, could try to run into the forest, but she'd tried that before. Could try to fight, but she'd lose, or she could choose something else entirely. "What do you want me to do?" Claire asked, and hated how defeated she sounded. Thorne stopped a few feet away. "I want you to tell me the truth, not what you think I want to hear, not what you think will keep you safe. Just the truth." "About what?" "About whether any part of you wants to stay." The question hung between them, terrible and honest, and Claire realized with sick certainty that she didn't know the answer. Chapter 9. The Truth Between. Claire stood there in the fading light, Thorne waiting, and the question sat between them like something alive. "Does any part of you want to stay?" She should have said no immediately, should have spat it at him, definitive and final. But her mouth wouldn't form the word. Because God, because there was a part of her, some small, treacherous corner that remembered the mornings, the quiet, the feeling of being held at night like she mattered, the version of this life that had existed before she knew what was in the freezer. And that part whispered, "What if you could have that again? What if you could just unknow what you know?" "I don't know," she said finally, and the admission felt like swallowing glass. Thorne's expression didn't change. "Thank you for being honest." "Does it matter? I mean," she gestured vaguely at everything. "What difference does it make how I feel? You're still you. I still know what you've done." "It matters to me." He took a step closer, and she didn't back away. Couldn't. Was too tired. "Because I need to know if there's anything left to save." "Of what? Us?" She laughed, but it came out broken. "There is no us, Thorne. There never was. You built this whole thing on a lie." The lie was omission. Everything else, how I felt about you, how you felt about me, that was real. "Was it?" Claire's voice rose. "How do I know any of it was real? How do I know you didn't just, I don't know, study me? Figure out what I wanted and perform it? Like you perform being normal for the people in town?" He flinched. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" "It was—" He stopped, rubbed his face. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. I saw you at that book fair, and you looked lost, like you were trying to disappear into the crowd, and I recognized it because I've felt that way my entire life, like I don't fit, like I'm performing being human and everyone can tell it's fake. He met her eyes. But when we talked, it didn't feel like performing. It felt like I could just be, and you'd be okay with it. Despite everything, Claire felt something twist in her chest, because she remembered that feeling too. That first conversation, the way he'd looked at her like she was interesting instead of broken. I wanted that, she admitted. Someone who didn't need me to be fixed or saved or anything other than what I was. And I gave you that. You also gave me human meat for dinner. The words landed like stones. Thorne's jaw worked, and for a moment she thought he might argue, justify, rationalize. Instead, he just nodded. Yeah, I did. And I can't take that back. Can't make it untrue. He looked past her toward the darkening forest. But I can tell you what I'm willing to do going forward. Which is what? Whatever you need. He said it simply. You want me to turn myself in? I'll do it. Tonight. We'll drive to the sheriff's office together, and I'll confess everything. You want me to let you go and disappear? I'll get you money, the truck, and you'll never see me again. You want... He stopped, swallowed hard. You want me dead? I'll give you the gun from the shed and turn around, whatever brings you peace. Claire stared at him. You're serious? Yes. Why? Because I love you. He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. And maybe that's selfish. Maybe it's fucked up, but it's true. I love you enough to let you choose, even if you choose to destroy me. She wanted to call bullshit, wanted to tell him this was another manipulation, another performance. But she'd seen his face in the loft when he broke down, had heard the tremor in his voice when he talked about his father, had watched him now standing in the road offering her 3 ways to end him, and his hands were shaking. This was real, terrifyingly, impossibly real. I don't want you dead, Claire said quietly. I just want to not be here anymore. Okay. He pulled keys from his pocket, the truck keys, and held them out. Take it. There's a full tank, cash in the glove box. About $2,000. It'll get you wherever you need to go. She didn't move. Just like that? Just like that. What about evidence? The freezer? The shed? I'll deal with it. His voice was flat. After you're gone, I'll handle everything. Clean it all out. Turn myself in or disappear. Your choice. My choice, Claire repeated. The words felt foreign. She hadn't had a real choice in weeks. Months, if she was honest. Maybe longer. She stepped forward, reached for the keys. Thorne's hand closed around hers, not restraining, just holding. One thing. What? If you go to the police, if you tell them everything, I won't fight it. I'll confess. But I need you to know that you'll be connected to this forever. Your name will be in the news. People will want to know how you didn't realize, why you stayed. They'll pick apart every moment we had together, looking for signs you missed. Your life will become about this, about me. His thumb traced across her knuckles. I'm not saying that to threaten you. I'm saying it so you can make an informed choice. She pulled her hand free, clutched the keys. What's the alternative? I just leave? Pretend none of this happened? You go. Start over somewhere far from here. Change your name if you want. Build a new life. He stepped back, giving her space. I'll make sure nothing connects back to you. As far as anyone knows, You moved away months ago, and we broke up. End of story. And you? I'll figure something out. Maybe I'll disappear too, somewhere remote. Canada, Alaska." He smiled, and it was sad and tired and true. "Maybe I'll finally get that therapy I've been avoiding." Claire looked down at the keys in her hand, heavy, real, the weight of freedom. She could get in that truck right now, drive to the nearest town, not Ashford, somewhere bigger, where she could disappear into a crowd and never look back. Start over, become someone new, someone who hadn't eaten her boyfriend's victims, someone who hadn't loved a killer. Or she could drive straight to the police, tell them everything, watch them arrest him, testify, see him locked away forever, get justice for Kayla and Joel and Amy and all the others whose name she didn't know. That's what a good person would do, right? That's what someone with any moral compass would choose. But then she thought about the trial, the media, her face on the news. Woman lives with cannibal killer for 6 months, didn't notice. The think pieces, the true crime podcasts. Her mother calling, finally, after years of silence, wanting to know how this happened. Daniel vindicated in his assessment of her judgment. She'd spend the rest of her life being a woman who loved a monster. "If I go," she said slowly, "if I just leave and keep quiet, how do I know you won't just start again?" "You don't." He said it without hesitation. "I could tell you I won't, but I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I can control it long term. All I know is that right now, in this moment, I'm choosing to let you go. That has to be enough." It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was all she had. Claire walked to the truck, keys clutched so tight they bit into her palm. Opened the door, stopped. "The people in the freezer," she said without turning around. "They deserve to be found, to have funerals, families who know what happened." "I know. So turn yourself in after I'm gone. Give them that much." "Okay. Promise me." "I promise." And she believed him. God help her, she believed him. She climbed into the truck, started the engine. It coughed twice before catching, and the familiar rumble felt like waking up. Thorne stood in the road, hands in his pockets, watching her, not moving, not trying to stop her. Claire put the truck in gear, rolled forward, stopped beside him with the window down. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think part of you is good, buried deep, but there, and I hope you find it someday." His eyes were wet. "For what it's worth, you saved me. For a little while. That's more than anyone else ever did." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded, put the truck back in gear, and drove. In the rearview mirror, she watched him get smaller, watched him turn and walk back toward the cabin, shoulders hunched, alone. She watched until the road curved and he disappeared. Then she focused forward, on the road, on the darkening sky, on getting the hell out of these mountains. She didn't go to the police, not that night, not the next day, not ever. She drove to Roanoke, left the truck in a Walmart parking lot with the keys in the ignition, and bought a bus ticket to Asheville under a fake name. From there, another bus to Atlanta, then Memphis, then Denver. She moved like smoke, leaving no trail, and after 3 weeks of running, she found a tiny town in Montana called Seeley Lake, where nobody asked questions and cash was still king. She got a job at a diner, rented a room above a garage, started calling herself Sarah, and she waited. waited for the news story about the arrests in rural Virginia, about the cabin full of evidence, about Thorne confessing to everything. But weeks passed, then months, and nothing. No news story, no arrest, nothing. Either he'd broken his promise and disappeared instead, or something else had happened, something she'd never know about. And Claire, Sarah now, had to live with that uncertainty for the rest of her life. Chapter 10. Seeley Lake. Sarah, she'd started thinking of herself that way now, like Claire was someone she'd known once but couldn't quite remember. Had been working at the Timber Creek Diner for 4 months when the nightmares started. Not every night, just often enough that she dreaded sleep. They were always variations on the same theme. She was back in the cabin, and Thorne was cooking something on the stove. She'd ask what it was, and he'd turn, smiling, and say, "You, of course. I'm cooking you." And she'd look down and see her own hands were missing. She'd wake, gasping, checking her hands in the dark, counting fingers like a talisman against madness. The worst part wasn't the nightmares themselves. It was that some mornings, for just a few seconds after waking, she'd forget where she was, would reach for Thorne's side of the bed and feel a flash of panic when it was empty. Then she'd remember, and the panic would shift into something else, relief maybe, or grief, or both, tangled together until she couldn't tell which was which. Seeley Lake was small, maybe 1 to 600 people if you counted the folks scattered in the hills, and quiet in a way that should have felt familiar but didn't. It wasn't the same kind of quiet as the cabin. This was a community quiet. People knew each other, looked out for each other, asked questions if you seemed off. Sarah learned quickly to seem not off. She smiled at the regulars, remembered their orders, laughed at their jokes about the weather and the fishing and the tourist season that brought money, but also headaches. She wore her hair different, shorter, lighter, and kept her head down when she passed the sheriff's office on Main Street. Nobody questioned her story. She'd moved from out east after a bad breakup, needed a fresh start, like the mountains. It was generic enough to be forgettable, specific enough to discourage follow-up questions. Most people left her alone. Most. His name was Marcus Webb, and he came into the diner every Tuesday and Friday for the lunch special, mid-40s, weathered in the way of someone who worked outdoors, with gray threading through his dark hair and smile line that suggested he used them often. He was a wilderness guide, she learned, took tourists on multi-day backpacking trips through the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. "Best job in the world," he told her one Friday in October, watching her refill his coffee. "Just me and the mountains and people who actually want to be uncomfortable for a few days. No cell phones, no internet, just stars and silence." Sarah's hand had trembled slightly, coffee sloshing in the pot. "Sounds nice." "You hike?" "Used to." The words came out before she could stop them. "Not anymore." Something in her tone must have registered, because he didn't push, just nodded. Fair enough. Mountains aren't for everyone. But he kept coming back, kept making small talk. Never intrusive, never pushy, just present. And after a few weeks, Sarah found herself looking forward to Tuesdays and Fridays. Found herself laughing at his stories about the tourists who showed up in brand new boots that they hadn't broken in, or the guy who'd tried to bring a Bluetooth speaker on a wilderness trip "What'd you do?" she asked. "Made him leave it in my truck. Told him if I heard a single note of music on the trail, I'd throw it in the first river we crossed." He grinned. "He lasted 2 days before asking if we could turn back early. Said the quiet was too loud." Sarah laughed, actually laughed, and realized it was the first time in months that the sound hadn't felt forced. Marcus noticed. His smile softened. "You got a nice laugh. Should use it more often." And just like that, the walls went back up. "I should get back to work," she said, and walked away before he could respond. That night, lying in her narrow bed above the garage, Sarah stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out why a simple compliment had made her want to run. Because it had felt too close, too familiar, too much like the beginning of something she'd sworn she'd never let herself be vulnerable to again. Marcus wasn't Thorn. She knew that. Marcus was normal, kind, straightforward, the sort of man who probably called his mother on Sundays and paid his taxes on time and had never hurt anyone in his life. But that's what she'd thought about Thorn too, wasn't it? At the book fair, on that first hike, all those mornings waking up in his arms, feeling safe. How the hell was she supposed to trust her own judgment ever again? 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday that felt too warm for November, Marcus came in with a black eye and a split lip. Sarah froze mid-pour at another table, watching him slide into his usual booth. He caught her staring and waved her over. "Before you ask," he said, touching his lip gingerly, "the other guy looks worse." "What happened?" "Bar fight, sort of." He grimaced. "Guy was getting rough with his girlfriend outside the Antler. I asked him to back off. He took exception to my tone." "You stepped in," Sarah said, not a question. "Yeah, I'm a big believer in minding my own business, but—" He shrugged. "Some things you can't just walk past, you know?" Sarah set the coffee pot down carefully. "Is she okay? The girlfriend?" "I think so. Her friends took her home. I stuck around to give a statement to the deputy." He looked at her then, really looked, and his expression shifted. "Hey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine." But her hands were shaking because she was thinking about the missing posters, about Thorn saying, "Some things you can't just walk past," about how the people he killed were drifters, wanderers, people who wouldn't be missed, people who might have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, people who might have seen something they shouldn't have. What if some of them weren't random? The voice in her head whispered. What if some of them saw him with a body, witnessed something? What if he killed them to protect himself? "Sarah?" she snapped back. Marcus was watching her with concern now, half standing like he was ready to catch her if she fell. "Sorry, I'm just low blood sugar. I should eat something." The lie came easily, too easily. "Your usual?" "Sure. But seriously, if you need to sit down." "I'm fine." She grabbed the coffee pot and walked away, feeling his eyes on her back. She couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, lying awake, she pulled out the battered laptop she'd bought at a pawn shop and opened the browser, typed in "Missing Hikers, Virginia, 2024. The articles loaded slowly. She read through them systematically, looking for details she'd missed before. Kayla Hendricks, 26. Last seen March 15th. Experienced hiker. Car found at trailhead, pack missing, no body recovered. Joel Pritchard, 51. Last seen February 8th. Retired military, solo backpacker. Truck found 3 days later, no signs of struggle. Amy Navarro, 33, last seen April 2nd, worked as a nurse. Told friends she was doing a day hike, never came home. Sarah read the comments below the articles. Theories, speculation. People saying it was a serial killer. Others saying it was just the mountains claiming their due. A few saying the missing people probably just wanted to disappear, start new lives. She knew better. But reading through the details now, months removed, something bothered her. The dates were all close together. February, March, April. Like whoever was taking them had ramped up, lost control, or been interrupted. She opened a new tab, typed, Thorne arrested Virginia. Nothing relevant. Thorne Cabin, Virginia murder. Nothing. Ashford, Virginia missing persons 2024. The same articles from before. Nothing new since April. Which meant either Thorne had kept his promise and turned himself in under a different name, or he'd disappeared, or he was still out there, still hunting. Sarah closed the laptop, pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars. She'd made a choice back in May. She'd taken the truck and driven away and kept her mouth shut because she'd wanted to survive more than she'd wanted justice. And now she had to live with that. Had to live with the possibility that someone else, another Kayla, another Amy, was out there right now hiking a trail near a quiet cabin, about to meet a man with pale gray eyes who'd seem kind and helpful and safe, until they weren't. The next Friday, Marcus didn't come in. Sarah told herself it didn't matter. Told herself she wasn't disappointed. But she kept glancing at his usual booth, and when her shift ended at 3, she found herself walking past the guide service office on her way home. The lights were off. A sign in the window said, "Out on expedition. Back north, 20 west." So he was working, that's all. Nothing sinister, nothing wrong. She kept walking, made it half a block before she turned around and went back. There was a number on the sign, emergency contact. She pulled out her phone, the cheap prepaid she'd bought in Denver, and stared at it. This was stupid. Marcus was fine. He was on a trip, doing his job. But what if he wasn't? What if he'd asked too many questions? What if someone had noticed him being friendly with her? What if Thorne had somehow found out where she was and... Stop! She was spiraling, seeing connections that didn't exist. This was paranoia, not intuition. But her finger was already dialing. Timber Creek Guide Service, this is Jenny. Hi, Sarah's throat was dry. I'm calling about Marcus Webb. I'm a friend, and I just wanted to make sure his trip is going okay. Oh, sure. Yeah, Marcus is up in the Bob with a group of 4. They're not due back until the 22nd. Is there a message you want me to pass along when he checks in? Checks in? He calls from the satellite phone every couple days. Last one was yesterday morning. Everyone's doing great, though one of the clients is apparently not loving the freeze-dried meals. Jenny laughed. Typical? Relief flooded through Sarah so intensely her knees went weak. No message. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure he was okay. Oh, that's sweet. You want to leave your number? I can have him call when he gets back. No, that's okay. I'll catch him at the diner. She hung up, stood there on the sidewalk feeling like an idiot. Marcus was fine. He was doing his job, and she was losing her mind. But that night, she dreamed about the cabin again. Only this time, when Thorne turned from the stove, he had Marcus's face. You should have told someone, Marcus Thorne said. Now look what you made me do." And the pot on the stove wasn't stew. It was a hand, wearing a turquoise ring she recognized, Amy Navarro's hand. Sarah woke screaming. Play. Chapter 11. The Return. Sarah stopped sleeping. Not entirely. The human body won't allow that, but she rationed it. 2 hours here, 90 minutes there, always with the lights on, always sitting up so the dreams couldn't take full hold. She drank too much coffee, developed a tremor in her left hand that wouldn't quit. At the diner, people started noticing. "You feeling all right, hun?" Betty, the owner, asked one morning in mid-November. "You look like hell." "Just not sleeping great. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're jumpy as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs." Betty crossed her arms, the gesture maternal and immovable. "What's going on?" Sarah's mouth opened. For one terrifying second, she almost told the truth. Almost said, "I ran away from a serial killer who fed me his victims, and I don't know if he's dead or alive or coming for me, and I can't stop seeing hands in pots and hearing footsteps behind me, and I think I'm losing my mind." Instead, she said, "Bad breakup, still processing." Betty's expression softened. "Ah, say no more. Men are trash, honey. Present company of my late husband excluded, rest his soul." She patted Sarah's shoulder. "Take tomorrow off. Get some real sleep. Doctor's orders." Sarah wanted to argue, but exhaustion was making her stupid, making her see things that weren't there. Shadows moving in her peripheral vision, faces in the diner windows that looked almost like thorns. "Okay," she said. "Thanks." The day off didn't help. She spent it in her room, staring at the laptop, refreshing news sites from Virginia, looking for something, anything. Around 3 p.m., she found it. Not in the news, in a forum. One of those true crime message boards where amateur detectives picked apart cold cases and missing persons reports. The thread was titled, "Update, Ashford Missing Hikers. Possible connection?" Sarah's pulse hammered as she scrolled. Posted by user TrailSafe47. Has anyone else noticed the Ashford cases have gone completely quiet? Last disappearance was Amy Navarro in April. Nothing since. I've been tracking missing persons in that area for 3 years, and this is the longest gap we've seen. Thoughts? Reply from Mountain Mysteries. Maybe the perp moved on or got caught for something else. Reply from TrailSafe47. I called the Ashford Sheriff's Office last week. They said the cases are still open, but they have no active leads. When I pressed, they got real cagey. Something's up. Reply from Hiker Girl 2010. I was through that area in September, talked to some locals. They said there was a guy living way up in the hills, real isolated, who just disappeared around May. Left his cabin and everything. One person said the sheriff's department went up there to check on him after he didn't come into town for weeks. Place was empty, cleaned out. Sarah's vision tunneled. Cleaned out. Thorne had run, hadn't turned himself in, hadn't confessed. He'd just disappeared, which meant he was still out there somewhere, still free. And all those people, Kayla, Joel, Amy, the others whose names she didn't know, were still just missing, still unsolved. Their family still waiting for answers that would never come, because she'd chosen to save herself instead of them. Reply from TrailSafe47. Interesting. I wonder if local PD ever searched the cabin thoroughly. Might be worth an anonymous tip if you remember exactly where it was. Reply from Hiker Girl 2010. It was up past Ashford, maybe 8 miles. Gravel road that turns to dirt. I didn't see it myself, just heard about it. Local guy at the general store said, "The hermit's place, that's all I got." Reply from Trail Safe 47, "I might take a drive out there this spring. Document what I find. This case has always bothered me." Sarah slammed the laptop shut. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to sit on them, breathe, count to 10, 20, 30. If someone went to that cabin, if they found evidence Thorne had left behind, they'd find her fingerprints, her DNA. 6 months of her life lived in that space. They'd have questions. Questions she couldn't answer without admitting she'd known, she'd seen, she'd fled, she'd chosen silence. That night, she bought a bus ticket, not to Virginia, God, not there, but away from Seeley Lake, away from Montana, somewhere even more anonymous. Phoenix, maybe, Las Vegas, somewhere she could disappear into crowds instead of small-town familiarity. The bus left at 6 a.m. She had 12 hours to pack her life, such as it was, into the single duffel bag she'd been living out of for months. She was folding a shirt when someone knocked on her door. Sarah froze. It was 9:30 at night. Nobody came up here. The garage owner lived in town, and she paid rent by leaving cash in an envelope on the first of the month. She'd made no friends, had no visitors. Another knock. Firmer this time. "Sarah, you in there?" Marcus. She exhaled, tension bleeding out of her shoulders. Just Marcus. He must have gotten back from his trip early. She opened the door. He stood on the landing, still in his hiking gear, pack slung over one shoulder. His face was windburned, beard grown out, eyes tired but warm. "Hey," he said, "sorry to just show up. Jenny at the office said you'd called and I wanted to—" He stopped, really looking at her. "Jesus, are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine. You look—" He glanced past her into the room, saw the open duffel, the scattered clothes. "Are you leaving?" I need to go. For a while." "Because of me?" His face crumpled. "Look, if I came on too strong or made you uncomfortable, I'm sorry. That wasn't my intention. I just thought—" "It's not you." The words came out too fast, too defensive. "You've been nothing but nice. It's just complicated." "Okay." He held up his hands. "Okay, I get it. But can we talk for a minute? Please." Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to close the door, to finish packing and get on that bus and never look back. But she was so tired. Tired of running, tired of being alone with the weight of what she knew. "5 minutes," she said, and stepped aside. Marcus came in, set his pack down carefully, and lowered himself onto the one chair like his legs hurt. Probably did, after a week in the wilderness. "You want coffee?" Sarah asked, more from habit than hospitality. "I want you to tell me what's going on." He said it gently, but his eyes were sharp, observant. "You've been scared since the day you walked into that diner. I've watched you flinch every time the door opens. You check the parking lot before you leave your shift. You don't talk about where you're from. And now you're leaving in the middle of the night with one bag." He leaned forward. "I'm a guide, Sarah. I'm trained to read people, to notice when something's off. And something is very, very off with you." She should have lied. Should have fed him some line about an ex-boyfriend, a stalker, debt collectors, anything. Instead, she said, "What if I told you I knew something about someone who hurt people, and I didn't tell anyone because I was scared?" Marcus's expression didn't change. "I'd say that's a hell of a position to be in. Would you think I was a coward?" I'd think you were human." He rubbed his face, exhaustion showing through. "Look, I don't know what you're mixed up in, but I've been guiding long enough to know that sometimes people get in over their heads through no fault of their own. Sometimes the world puts you in impossible situations where there's no right answer. What if people died because I didn't speak up?" Now his expression changed, sharpened. "Did you kill anyone?" "No." "Did you know they were going to die? Could you have stopped it?" "I didn't know. Not until after, but I could have. I should have told someone. Police, FBI, someone." Her voice cracked. "Instead, I ran, and he's still out there, and if he hurts someone else, that's on me." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, "This person, are they looking for you?" "I don't know. Maybe. I can't." She was breathing too fast, panic rising. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. You should go." Hey. He stood, crossed to her, but stopped just out of reach. "I'm not going anywhere, and you're not in trouble with me, okay? I just need to understand what we're dealing with." "We?" She laughed, bitter and broken. "There's no we. This is my mess." "Maybe, but you look like you're drowning, and I'm a pretty good swimmer." He smiled, small and sad. "So how about this? You tell me what happened, all of it, and then we figure out what to do next. Together." She wanted to trust him. God, she wanted to so badly, but she'd trusted before, and look where that had gotten her. "What if I told you," she said slowly, "that the person I'm afraid of is the person I used to love? What if I told you I ate dinner with him every night for months and never knew what he was? What if—" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What if I told you I'm not sure I deserve to be saved?" Marcus's eyes were wet. "Then I'd tell you that trauma lies, that the person who hurt you wants you to believe you're complicit. That isolation is how predators maintain power." He took a careful step closer. "And I'd tell you that you're not alone anymore. Not if you don't want to be." Sarah looked at him. This man she barely knew, who'd come to her door in the middle of the night because she'd made a worried phone call, who was offering help without demanding explanations. And something inside her broke. Or maybe it was already broken, and this was the first time someone had offered to help her pick up the pieces. "His name is Thorn," she said, "or that's what he called himself. I don't know if it was real, and for 6 months I lived with a serial killer and I never knew. Not until I found his—" She swallowed hard. "Not until I found the people he'd killed, in his freezer, in his shed, and he'd been feeding me." She couldn't finish, couldn't say it out loud again. Marcus went pale. Jesus Christ. "I ran. He let me go. Told me he'd turn himself in. But he didn't. He just disappeared. And now someone on the internet is talking about searching his cabin, and if they find my DNA there, if they start asking questions—" She was crying now, couldn't stop. "I should have told someone. I should have made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. But I was a coward, and I just wanted to survive. And now I don't know what to do." Marcus was silent for a long time. So long that Sarah thought maybe she'd finally said too much. Finally crossed the line into unforgivable. Then he said, "Where's the cabin?" She blinked. "What?" "The cabin. Where is it?" "Outside Ashford, Virginia. Why?" He pulled out his phone, started typing. "We're going to call the FBI. Right now. Tonight. You're going to tell them everything you just told me, and they're going to handle it." I can't. They'll arrest me. For what? Being a victim? Being manipulated? He looked up, eyes fierce. You didn't do anything wrong, Sarah. He did. And yeah, maybe you should have come forward sooner, but you were traumatized and scared, and that's human. The FBI will understand that. You don't know that? No. But I know that running isn't working. You're having nightmares. You're not sleeping. You're about to get on a bus at 6 a.m. and keep running for the rest of your life. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want. Yes, you do. He set the phone down, looked at her with something that might have been respect. You want to stop him. That's why you called to check on me. That's why you're still reading news about Virginia. You want him stopped. You're too scared to do it alone. He was right. God, he was right. What if they don't believe me? Then we make them believe you. But first, you have to try. Sarah looked at the phone in his hand, at the duffel bag on the floor, at a door that led out to the stairs and the street and the bus station. 2 paths, 2 choices. Keep running, or finally stand still. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Marcus smiled. Okay. He handed her the phone, and Sarah, who'd been Claire once, who'd loved a monster and survived, dialed the FBI tip line and started talking. Dadapoa, Chapter 12, The Testimony. The FBI field office in Missoula was smaller than Sarah had imagined. Just a nondescript building on East Broadway, sandwiched between a credit union and a law office. You could walk past it 100 times and never know what happened inside. Marcus drove her there on a gray morning 3 days after the phone call. He'd stayed with her through that first conversation, the tip line operator, then the agent who'd called back within an hour, then the longer call the next day was someone who identified himself as Special Agent Chen from the Violent Crimes Unit. I need you to come in, Chen had said, his voice calm and professional. Face to face. We'll record your statement, go through everything in detail. Can you do that? Sarah had looked at Marcus, who'd nodded. Yes, she'd said, I can do that. Now, sitting in a beige interview room with industrial carpet and fluorescent lights that hummed like insects, Sarah wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Agent Chen sat across from her, mid-40s, Asian American, wearing a suit that looked slept in and glasses that he kept adjusting. Beside him was Agent Reeves, a woman maybe 10 years younger, with red hair pulled back tight and eyes that gave away nothing. Marcus had been asked to wait outside. Standard procedure, Chen had explained. We need her statement without any outside influence. The recording equipment sat between them on the table, red light blinking, watching. Let's start from the beginning, Chen said, pen poised over a legal pad. Tell us how you met him. So Sarah did. She told him about the book fair, about Thorne, if that was even his real name, about the cabin and the months of what had felt like love, but was really just a carefully constructed cage. She told them about the maps in the cellar, the notebook with its clinical entries, the freezer in the shed. Her voice stayed mostly steady, only broke twice. Once when describing the hand with burgundy nail polish. Once when explaining how she'd eaten the stew not knowing what it was. Agent Reeves took notes, didn't react, didn't judge, or at least didn't show it. When Sarah finished, Chen leaned back in his chair. And he just let you go? Just gave you the truck keys and let you drive away? Yes. Why? He said he loved me. Said he'd turn himself in after I was gone. She met Chen's eyes. I know how it sounds. I know it seems impossible. But that's what happened. Did you believe him? That he'd turn himself in? Sarah thought about that. Really thought. I wanted to, but no, I guess I didn't. Not really. But you didn't go to the police? No. Why not? This was the question she'd been dreading. The one that would determine whether they saw her as a victim or an accomplice. Because I was ashamed, she said quietly. Because I knew people would ask how I didn't know, why I stayed. What kind of person eats dinner with someone for 6 months and doesn't realize they're a killer? She swallowed hard. And because he was right, going public would have destroyed what was left of my life. The media, the trial, everyone picking apart every moment. I wanted to disappear. Start over. I know that's wrong. I know people deserved answers. But I chose survival over justice, and I've been living with that ever since. Reeves spoke for the first time. Are you living with it? Because from what Agent Chen told me, you're having nightmares, not sleeping, about to flee Montana when Mr. Webb intervened. I guess I'm not living with it very well. No, Reeves said, not unkindly. You're not. That's trauma response, classic PTSD. You're not a coward, Ms. She paused. What should we call you, Sarah? Claire? I don't know anymore. Chen exchanged a glance with Reeves, then stood. I'm going to get us some coffee. Give you a minute to breathe. We'll be right back. They left the room, and Sarah sat alone with the red blinking light, wondering if this was it. If they believed her or thought she was insane or complicit or both. The door opened, but it wasn't Chen and Reeves. It was a man in his 60s, gray-haired, wearing khakis and a windbreaker. He had kind eyes and the worn look of someone who'd seen too much. Claire Duval, he said, and hearing her real name after so many months as Sarah made her flinch. I'm Detective Bill Morrison, Ashford Sheriff's Department. I drove up here when I heard you'd come in. You're from Ashford, born and raised, and I've been working those missing persons cases for the past year. He sat down where Chen had been, moved slower, like his bones hurt. I need you to know something before we go any further. Sarah's chest tightened. What? We found a cabin. The room tilted. What? Back in June, anonymous tip said there was a place up in the hills that might be connected to the disappearances. We got a warrant, went up there. He pulled out a folder, opened it. It was empty, cleaned out like you said. But not perfectly. There were still traces. Blood in the floorboards of the shed, hair and fiber evidence, and in the cellar. He slid a photo across the table. Sarah looked, immediately wished she hadn't. It was the freezer, open, filled with packages of meat, each labeled with dates and cuts, just like she remembered. We sent samples to the state lab. Took months to get results back, but they confirmed it. Human remains, multiple individuals. Morrison's voice was gentle, but firm. We also found fingerprints, yours and his. Took a while to run them since you weren't in the system, but eventually we got a hit from your teaching license in Richmond. You've been looking for me, Sarah said. Not as a suspect, as a witness. Maybe the only witness. He closed the folder. I've been trying to track you down for 3 months. You covered your tracks well. But I knew you'd surface eventually. Trauma always brings people back. Are you arresting me? No, but I need you to testify. When we catch him, and we will catch him, I need you to stand up in court and tell a jury what you saw, what you know. Can you do that? Sarah thought about Kayla's smile on the poster, Amy's hand in the freezer, Joel's family still waiting for answers. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." Morrison nodded. "Good, because there's something else you should know." "What?" "We've been monitoring hiking trails across Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, looking for patterns. And 2 weeks ago, a woman went missing near Spruce Knob in West Virginia. Solo hiker, experienced, car found at the trailhead." He paused. "She had dark hair, early 30s, matches the profile of his previous victims." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "He's still hunting." "We think so, which means we need to move fast. We need everything you can give us, descriptions, patterns, anything that might help us predict where he'll go next." I was isolated. I don't know where else he might have gone." "You knew him, lived with him. That's more than anyone else can say." Morrison stood. "I know this is hard. I know you've been through hell. But right now, you might be the only thing standing between him and his next victim." The weight of that settled on Sarah's shoulders, heavy and suffocating, but for the first time in months, she felt something other than fear. Purpose. "Okay," she said, "tell me what you need." They talked for 6 hours. Chen and Reeves came back with coffee and sandwiches. Morrison stayed the whole time, asking questions, taking notes, occasionally nodding like something finally made sense. Sarah told them everything she could remember. Thorne's routines, the way he talked about the forest like he knew every tree, his skills, carpentry, tracks, butchering, the way he chose victims who were isolated, vulnerable, the methodical documentation in his notebook. "He was organized," Chen said, making notes. "Classic organized killer. High intelligence, controlled behavior, careful planning." "But he let you go," Reeves pointed out. "That's not typical. Organized killers don't usually release witnesses." "He didn't see me as a witness," Sarah said. "He saw me as, I don't know, his salvation, his proof that he could be normal." "Or his final victim," Morrison said quietly. "One he was extending, savoring, letting you think you'd escape so the hunt could continue." The thought made Sarah's skin crawl. "You think he's tracking me? I think it's possible. These types don't let go easily." Morrison pulled out another photo. "Do you recognize this?" It was a truck, red, old, with rust spots along the fender. "That's his truck, the one I drove away in. We found it abandoned outside Roanoke in June, 3 weeks after you left. He removed the plates, wiped it down, left it in a Walmart parking lot." Morrison looked at her. "Just like you did." The implication hung in the air. He'd followed her, at least part of the way. Maybe lost her trail in Roanoke when she'd taken the bus. Maybe not. "We need to put you in protective custody," Chen said, "until we apprehend him." "Well, how long?" "As long as it takes." Sarah thought about her room above the garage, the diner. Marcus, waiting, outside, probably pacing, worried. The life she'd tried to build in Seeley Lake, small and fragile, and maybe not real, but hers. "I can't just disappear again," she said. "I can't keep running." "You wouldn't be running. You'd be protecting yourself while we do our job." "And what if you don't catch him? What if he's already gone? What if I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder waiting?" "Then at least you'd be alive to do it," Reeves said. Sarah looked at the folder on the table, at Morrison's weathered face, at the recording equipment still blinking red. "I'll testify," she said. "When you catch him, I'll testify. But I'm not hiding. I'm done hiding. Ms. Duval, my name is Sarah now, and I'm not a victim anymore. I'm a survivor. There's a difference. Morrison smiled. Small, sad, but genuine. Yes, there is. They released her at 6 p.m. with a phone number to call if anything seemed off, a panic button app installed on her phone, and instructions to check in every 48 hours. Marcus was still in the waiting room, reading a magazine from 2019, probably for the 4th time. He stood when he saw her, searching her face. You okay? I don't know. Ask me tomorrow. He nodded. Fair enough. You want to get dinner? I want to go home. Montana home or Montana home for now. They walked to his truck in silence. The sky was turning purple, stars beginning to show through. It reminded Sarah of the mountains in Virginia, the porch of the cabin. Thorne beside her, pointing out constellations. She pushed the memory away. Thank you, she said as Marcus started the engine, for making me call, for staying. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. You could have walked away. Should have. Probably. Instead, you... Her voice caught. You believed me when I didn't even believe myself. Marcus reached across the console, took her hand, squeezed once. You're stronger than you think, Sarah, or Claire, whoever you want to be. I don't know who I want to be. Then I guess we'll figure it out together. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Sarah thought that might actually be possible. Chapter 13. The Waiting. Sarah went back to work at the diner. It felt wrong at first, pouring coffee and taking orders like she was still the same person who'd clocked out 3 days ago. Like the world should have shifted somehow, rearranged itself to acknowledge what had happened in that interview room. But the regulars still ordered the same meals. Betty still burned bacon. The coffee machine still made that grinding sound that meant it would die soon and no one would fix it until it did. Normal. Aggressively. Relentlessly normal. Except Sarah kept the panic button app open on her phone. Kept it in her apron pocket, screen facing out, so she could hit it with one touch if needed. And she watched the door. Every time it opened, the little bell chiming bright and cheerful. Her body tensed, ready to run, ready to fight. It was never him. Marcus came in every day now, not just Tuesdays and Fridays. He'd take his usual booth and work on his laptop, updating his website, answering client emails. But really, he was just there, a presence, steady and solid and safe. You don't have to babysit me, Sarah told him one afternoon, refilling his coffee for the 3rd time. I'm not babysitting, I'm working, and this place has better coffee than my apartment. We use Folgers from a can. Exactly, better than mine. He smiled, but his eyes were serious. Besides, I like the company. She wanted to tell him to stop. That getting close to her was dangerous, that Thorne might be watching, that anyone who cared about her became a target. But the truth was, she didn't want to be alone anymore, so she let him stay. The nightmares changed. Before, they'd been about the cabin, the shed, the freezer, Thorne's face in the dark, calm and terrible. Now they were about the woman in West Virginia, the one Morrison had mentioned. Dark hair, early 30s, experienced hiker. In the dreams, Sarah was her. Walking the trail as the sun set, thinking about dinner plans or work tomorrow, or whether she'd remembered to pay her electric bill. Normal thoughts, human thoughts. And then footsteps behind her, patient, steady. A voice. Excuse me. do you know if this trail loops back to the parking lot? She'd turn, and Thorne would be there, smiling, holding a map like he was just another hiker who'd gotten turned around. And Sarah would try to scream, try to warn her, but no sound would come out. She was just watching, helpless. As the woman smiled back and said, "Sure, let me show you," and walked off with him into the trees, into the dark. She'd wake gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, Marcus's number already pulled up on her phone before she remembered she didn't need to call. He was downstairs, sleeping on her couch because she'd finally admitted, after the 5th nightmare in a row, that she was afraid to be alone at night. He'd moved in without asking, just showed up one evening with his sleeping bag in a duffel and said, "I'm staying, don't argue." She hadn't. 2 weeks after the FBI interview, Morrison called. "We got a hit," he said without preamble. "Thorne used a credit card. Gas station outside Elkins, West Virginia, 3 days ago." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. "Near Spruce Knob. 5 miles from where the woman disappeared." Morrison's voice was grim. "We've got state police and FBI canvassing the area, showing his photo or the composite we made from your description. Someone will have seen him. What if they haven't? What if he's already gone? Then we keep looking. But Sarah, this is good. He's making mistakes, getting sloppy. That means we're close." After they hung up, Sarah sat on her bed, Marcus's sleeping bag neatly rolled in the corner, and tried to feel relief. They were close. They'd catch him. It would be over, but all she felt was the weight of that woman's family somewhere waiting by a phone that wouldn't ring with good news, waiting for a body that might never be found. That night at the diner during the dinner rush, the bell chimed and Sarah looked up out of habit. A man stood in the doorway, tall, dark hair, wearing a flannel shirt. Her heart stopped. Then he turned, and she saw his face, round where Thorne's was angular, beard fuller, eyes brown instead of gray, and the world snapped back into focus. Not him, just someone who looked similar in the half-second before she really looked. But her hands were shaking so badly she had to set down the coffee pot before she dropped it. Betty noticed, came over, put a hand on her shoulder. "You need a break, honey?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You haven't been fine since you got back from Missoula." Betty's voice was gentle but firm. "And I don't need to know what happened there, but I need you to take care of yourself. So go. Take 15 minutes. Breathe." Sarah wanted to argue, but she was starting to understand that surviving didn't mean pretending everything was okay. It meant admitting when it wasn't. She went out the back door, into the alley behind the diner. It smelled like grease and garbage and cold November air. She leaned against the brick wall and focused on breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The door opened. Marcus. "Saw you leave," he said. "Thought you might want company." "I thought he was there, in the diner. Just for a second I was so sure." She laughed, but it came out jagged. "I'm losing it." "You're traumatized. There's a difference." He leaned against the wall next to her, close but not touching. "You know what my therapist told me after my brother died?" Sarah looked at him. "You have a brother?" "Had. Car accident when I was 22. Drunk driver." His voice was matter-of-fact, but something underneath ached. For a year after, I'd see him everywhere, in crowds, in cars passing by. My brain couldn't accept that he was gone, so it kept finding him. kept trying to make him alive again. What did your therapist say? That grief and trauma do weird things to perception, that I wasn't crazy, I was just hurt, and hurt people see the world differently until they heal. He glanced at her. You're not losing it, Sarah. You're just hurt. And healing takes time. What if I don't have time? What if he finds me before I'm ready? Then you won't be alone. I'll be there. Morrison will be there. The FBI will be there. He finally reached over, took her hand. You're not in that cabin anymore. You're not isolated. You've got people now. Sarah looked down at their joined hands. His was warm, calloused from rope and pack straps, and a life lived outdoors. Solid. Real. Why are you doing this? She asked. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave as hell. I know you survived something that would have broken most people. I know you're trying to do the right thing even though it scares you. He squeezed her hand gently. That's more than enough. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself lean into this, into safety, into trust, into the possibility that maybe not everyone was a monster in disguise. But Thorne had seemed safe too, had held her hand just like this, had told her she was brave and strong and special, and she'd believed him. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, the testimony, standing up in court, seeing him again. You don't have to decide right now. First they have to catch him, and when they do, we'll figure out the rest, one step at a time. And if they don't catch him? Marcus didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet but certain. Then we keep going. We live. We don't let him win by making you a prisoner of your own fear. Is that what your therapist said too? No, that's what my brother would have said if he'd lived long enough to say it. Sarah looked at him, this man who'd lost someone he loved, who understood trauma, who'd chosen to stay when he could have walked away and felt something shift. Not love, not yet, but maybe the beginning of trust, and that was more than she'd thought she'd ever feel again. Thank you, she said. You keep saying that. I'll keep meaning it. They stood there in the alley behind the diner in the cold November air, and for a moment Sarah let herself imagine a future where this was normal, where Thorne was caught and locked away, and she could just be a woman holding hands with a kind man in an alley, planning a life that didn't revolve around fear. It felt impossible, but for the first time in months, it also felt like something worth fighting for. 3 days later, Morrison called again. We found her, he said. Sarah's breath caught. Alive? No, I'm sorry. His voice was heavy. Buried shallow about 2 miles from the Spruce Knob Trail. We confirmed it's the missing hiker, Jennifer Ashford. Same M.O. as the others. Blunt force trauma, signs of... He paused. Signs of butchering. Sarah closed her eyes, pressed the phone against her ear so hard it hurt. When? Medical examiner says she died within 12 hours of disappearing, 2 weeks ago, before I called the FBI. Yes, so this isn't my fault. She said it like a mantra, like if she repeated it enough, she'd believe it. No, Sarah, this isn't your fault. This is his fault, only his. But the woman's name echoed in her head anyway. Jennifer Ashford, 32, according to the news article Sarah pulled up after they hung up. From Charleston, worked as a teacher, loved hiking, had a dog named Biscuit, and a garden she posted about on Instagram. She'd been real, alive, planning things, looking forward to things. And now she was evidence. Sarah sat on her bed and cried for the first time since leaving Virginia. Cried for Jennifer, for Kayla and Joel and Amy, for all the people whose names she didn't know, who'd walked into the woods and never walked out. Cried for herself, for the woman she'd been, who thought love was simple, who thought you could trust the look in someone's eyes. Marcus found her like that, curled on her side, tears soaking the pillow, and didn't ask questions. Just lay down behind her, wrapped his arms around her, and held on. They found another one, she said. I know. Morrison called me too. Wanted me to be here when you found out. I could have stopped this if I'd called sooner. You couldn't have stopped this. He killed her before you ever walked into that FBI office. You know that, right? Logically, yes, but it doesn't feel that way. I know. His voice was soft against her hair. But feelings lie sometimes, especially trauma feelings. The truth is, you're doing everything you can. You're cooperating. You're testifying. You're helping them build a case so he never hurts anyone else. What if they don't catch him? They will. How do you know? Because he's unraveling, using credit cards, staying in the same area, getting sloppy. That's what Morrison said, right? Right. So they'll catch him. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but they will. He tightened his arms around her. And until then, you're safe. We'll make sure of it. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways this could go wrong, but she was so tired of being afraid, so tired of carrying this alone. So she just nodded against his chest and let him hold her while the afternoon light faded through the window, and somewhere in West Virginia, police were processing a crime scene, looking for evidence, building a case, hunting a hunter. And Sarah, who'd been Claire once, who'd loved and lost and survived, closed her eyes and tried to believe that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was finally approaching its end. Chapter 14. The Convergence. The call came on a Thursday in early December during the breakfast rush. Sarah was wiping down tables when her phone buzzed. Morrison's name on the screen. She stepped into the kitchen, Betty giving her a knowing nod. We have him. 3 words. That's all it took for Sarah's world to stop spinning. What? West Virginia State Police spotted him at a motel outside Petersburg, tried to run. They took him down without incident. Morrison's voice was tight with controlled emotion. He's in custody. It's over. Sarah leaned against the industrial sink, legs suddenly unreliable. You're sure? You're absolutely sure it's him? Fingerprints match. DNA match from the cabin evidence, and Sarah... He paused. He had a journal with him. Current one. Detailed entries about Jennifer Ashford. About others we didn't know about yet. He documented everything. How many? We're still counting, but at least 18 over 7 years. 18 people. 18 lives. 18 families who'd been waiting for answers. Sarah, you still there? Yeah, I'm here. Her voice sounded far away, even to herself. What happens now? Now he gets arraigned, then trial. The prosecutor will be in touch about your testimony, but the physical evidence is solid. The journal, the DNA, the remains we recovered. Your testimony will help, but even without it, we've got him. When's the trial? Probably 6 to 8 months. These things take time. 6 to 8 months of knowing he was alive. Locked up, but alive. Breathing. Existing. while 18 people didn't. Okay, Sarah said. Okay, thank you for calling. Sarah, this is good news. He can't hurt anyone else. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. You're safe now. Safe. The word felt foreign, like something from another language she'd forgotten how to speak. Yeah, she said. Safe. After she hung up, she stood in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the sounds of the diner, the griddle sizzling, Betty singing off-key to the radio, the coffee machine grinding out its death rattle. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. She should have felt relief, should have felt victorious. Instead, she just felt empty. That night, Marcus brought Chinese takeout to her room. They sat on the floor, backs against the bed, eating lo mein straight from the cartons. Morrison called me too, he said around a mouthful of noodles. Wanted to make sure you were okay. I don't know what I am. That's fair. They ate in silence for a while. Then Sarah said, I thought I'd feel different when they caught him. I thought it would feel like, I don't know, closure, victory, something. What does it feel like? Like I'm still waiting. Like the other shoe hasn't dropped yet. She set down her carton. Is that crazy? No, it's trauma. Your nervous system's been in fight or flight for months. It doesn't just switch off because someone tells you the threat's gone. He looked at her. It'll take time to really believe you're safe, to stop looking over your shoulder. How long did it take you? After your brother? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I'm not sure it ever fully goes away. The vigilance, the waiting for bad news, but it gets quieter, more manageable. You learn to live with it instead of letting it live for you. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, felt him tense slightly, then relax. Felt his arm come around her, careful and tentative. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. Why aren't you scared of me, of this whole situation? Most people would have run the second I told them about Thorne. Most people aren't me. That's not an answer. He sighed, shifted so he could see her face. You remember when I told you about the bar fight? The guy who was rough with his girlfriend? Yeah. What I didn't tell you is that I knew her. The girlfriend. She'd been coming into the diner where I used to work back in Colorado for months. Always wore long sleeves, even in summer. Always jumpy. And I never said anything. Never asked if she was okay. Just served her coffee and minded my business. His jaw tightened. One day she stopped coming. Found out later he put her in the hospital. Broken ribs, fractured skull. She survived, but barely. Marcus, I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I learned something that day. That silence is complicity. That minding your business when someone's hurting is the same as being the one who hurts them. He looked at her, eyes fierce. So when you told me your story, when you said you were scared and ashamed and didn't know what to do, I saw that woman, the one I failed, and I decided I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. Sarah felt tears building. I'm not a project. You don't have to save me to make up for her. I know, but maybe, he smiled, small and sad. Maybe we save each other. Is that allowed? She kissed him. Didn't plan it, didn't overthink it, just leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Soft, tentative, testing. He kissed her back, gentle, patient, like he had all the time in the world. When they pulled apart, he said, that was unexpected. Good unexpected or bad unexpected? Very good unexpected. He touched her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "But Sarah, I need you to know I'm not expecting anything. We don't have to. This doesn't have to be." "I know." And she did. Knew he'd wait. Knew he wouldn't push. Knew he saw her as a person, not a victim or a project or someone to be fixed. For the first time since the book fair, she felt like maybe she could trust her own judgment about someone. Maybe. "I'm not ready for anything serious," she said. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I like to try, if you're willing to be patient. I'm a wilderness guide. Patience is literally my job description." She laughed. Actually laughed. The sound felt rusty out of practice, but real. "Okay then," she said. "Let's be patient together." They finished their Chinese food, watched a movie on his laptop, something mindless and funny that required no emotional investment. And when it was late, when Marcus rolled out his sleeping bag on the floor like always, Sarah said, "You can sleep up here if you want. Just sleep." He looked at her for a long moment, checking to make sure she meant it. "Okay," he said. "Just sleep." They lay on opposite sides of the bed, carefully not touching, and Sarah stared at the ceiling, listening to him breathe. It wasn't the same as Thorne's breathing, wasn't the same rhythm or depth or cadence. It was Marcus. Just Marcus. And eventually, finally, she slept. No nightmares, no hands in pots, no footsteps in the dark. Just sleep. The next 6 months passed in a strange blur of waiting. The trial was scheduled, rescheduled, delayed for procedural reasons Sarah didn't fully understand. Morrison kept her updated. Thorne had pled not guilty, his public defender claiming diminished capacity due to childhood trauma, which made Sarah want to throw things. He knew exactly what he was doing, she told Morrison on one of their regular calls. He documented it, planned it. That's not diminished capacity. I know. The prosecution knows. The jury will know. His lawyers grasping at straws. Sarah went to therapy. Found a woman in Missoula who specialized in trauma, who didn't flinch when Sarah described what she'd eaten, who helped her understand that shame and complicity weren't the same thing. "You were a victim," the therapist said over and over, until Sarah almost believed it. What he did to you, the deception, the violation, the manipulation, that's on him, not you. She and Marcus took things slow, held hands, kissed sometimes, went on actual dates, dinner, movies, a hike that Sarah had to work up courage for but completed without panicking. He never pushed, never demanded explanations when she had bad days and needed space. He just stayed. Betty gave Sarah a raise, said she was the best waitress they'd had in years, which made Sarah cry in the bathroom for 10 minutes because she hadn't realized how much she needed to be good at something normal. And in West Virginia, in a county jail, Thorne waited for trial. Sarah tried not to think about what he was thinking, whether he thought about her, whether he regretted letting her go, whether he still believed what they'd had was love. In May, Morrison called, with the trial date, June 15th. "We need you in Virginia by the 10th, he said, "for prep. The prosecutor wants to go over your testimony. Make sure you're ready for cross-examination." "How long will I need to be there? A week? Maybe 2? Depends how long the trial runs." Sarah looked around her room, the one above the garage that had started as a hiding place and become something like home. Thought about the diner, about Marcus, about the small, fragile life she'd built here. Okay, she said. I'll be there. After she hung up, she sat on the bed and tried to imagine it. Walking into a courtroom, seeing Thorne for the first time in a year, telling a room full of strangers about the worst months of her life while he watched. Her hands were shaking. There was a knock on her door. Marcus, back from a supply run. "Hey," he said, seeing her face. "Morrison called?" "Trial's in June. I have to go to Virginia." He nodded. Set down the grocery bags. "Okay, I'll drive you." "Marcus, you don't have to." "I know, but I'm going to anyway." "You shouldn't have to do this alone." "It's 2 weeks. You'll miss work." "I'll reschedule my trips. It's fine." He sat beside her on the bed. "Sarah, look at me." She did. "You survived him once," Marcus said. "You'll survive him again. But this time, you won't be alone. I'll be there. Morrison will be there. The entire justice system will be there. And when it's over, we'll come back here. And you can keep being Sarah or Claire or whoever you decide to be." He took her hand. "But you get to decide, not him, never him again." Sarah leaned into him, let him hold her, and tried to believe he was right. Tried to believe that walking into that courtroom wouldn't break her all over again. Tried to believe she was strong enough for what came next. They drove to Virginia in Marcus's truck, the landscape slowly shifting from mountain west to mountain east, from pine to deciduous, from dry to humid. Sarah watched the miles disappear and felt like she was traveling backward through time, back to the person she'd been, the woman who thought a book fair was a safe place, who'd believed in fresh starts and second chances, who'd loved a monster and called it romance. "You're thinking too loud again," Marcus said somewhere in Missouri. "Sorry." "Don't be sorry, just talk to me." So she did. Told him about the first time she'd seen the cabin, how beautiful it had seemed, how Thorne had carried her over the threshold like it was a real beginning instead of a slow-motion ending. "I should have known," she said. "There were signs, red flags. I just ignored them. Because you wanted to believe in him. That's not weakness, that's hope." Marcus glanced at her. "And hope isn't something to be ashamed of, even when it's misplaced." They stopped in Nashville, St. Louis, Charleston. Each motel room looked the same. Generic art on the walls, scratchy comforters, ice machines that rattled through the night. Marcus always offered to get 2 rooms. Sarah always said one was fine. They didn't sleep together, not like that. But she needed him close, needed the reminder that not everyone who held her at night was hiding something terrible underneath. On their last night before Virginia, in a motel outside Roanoke, Sarah woke from a nightmare at 3 a.m. Not about Thorne this time, about the courtroom, about opening her mouth to testify and nothing coming out, about Thorne laughing as they dragged her away for perjury. Marcus woke when she did, reaching for her in the dark. "I've got you," he said. "I've got you. What if I can't do it? What if I get up there and I just freeze?" Then you take a breath. You look at Morrison, at the prosecutor, at me in the gallery, and you remember why you're doing this? He pulled her closer. "You're doing this for Kayla, for Joel and Amy and Jennifer, for all the people who can't speak for themselves. You're their voice now, and your voice is stronger than you think." Sarah pressed her face into his chest and let herself cry, for the woman she'd been, for the woman she was becoming, for all the versions of herself between. And in the morning, they drove the last 2 hours to Ashford, Virginia, where Sarah would finally face the man who'd tried to consume her. and prove he'd failed. Takar. Epilogue. What remains? The courthouse in Ashford was smaller than Sarah expected. Red, brick, white columns, built sometime in the 1800s and renovated just enough to have air conditioning and wheelchair ramps, but still feel like stepping into history. The kind of building where generations of people had stood and told their truths and waited for strangers to decide what those truths were worth. Sarah stood on the steps, Marcus beside her, Morrison waiting by the door. "You ready?" Morrison asked. No, she wasn't. Might never be. "Yes," she said anyway. The trial lasted 9 days. Sarah testified on day 4, walked into the courtroom in a borrowed dress. Morrison's wife had loaned it to her, navy blue and appropriate, and nothing like anything Sarah owned, and took the stand while Thorne watched from the defense table. He looked different. Thinner, grayer, wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, but his eyes were the same. Pale gray, unreadable. He smiled at her when she sat down. Small, almost fond, like they were old friends running into each other at a coffee shop. Sarah looked away, focused on the prosecutor, a woman named Andrea Valdez, mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back and a voice that commanded attention. "Please state your name for the record." "Claire Duval." The name felt strange in her mouth, like trying on old clothes that didn't fit anymore. "Though I've been going by Sarah Mitchell for the past year." "And why is that, Miss Duval?" "Because I was trying to disappear." "From the defendant?" "Yes." "Can you point him out for the jury?" Sarah looked, made herself look. Thorne sat very still, watching her with those pale eyes, and she remembered how he'd held her on cold nights, how he'd made her coffee every morning, how his hands had been gentle even when everything else about him was monstrous. "That's him," she said, pointing. "Thorne, or whatever his real name is." The defense attorney objected, was overruled. The trial continued. For 2 hours, Valdez walked Sarah through the story. The book fair, the cabin, the months of what had seemed like love, the discovery in the cellar, the escape. Sarah told it all, voice steady, hands gripping the edge of the witness box so tight her knuckles went white. Told about the freezer, the maps, the notebook with its clinical entries. She didn't cry, refused to give Thorne that satisfaction. But when Valdez asked, "Did you knowingly and willingly consume human remains?" Sarah's voice finally cracked. "No, I didn't know. If I'd known—" She stopped, breathed. "If I'd known, I never would have stayed. I would have run the first day. I would have called the police. I would have—" Her voice broke completely. "I would have done something, anything, instead of just living there like everything was normal." "And yet, you didn't go to the police immediately after discovering the truth. Why?" This was the question she'd been dreading, the one that made her sound complicit, guilty. "Because I was ashamed," Sarah said quietly. "Because I knew people would ask how I didn't know, why I stayed so long. What kind of person eats dinner with someone for months and doesn't realize they're a killer?" She looked at the jury. 12 faces, some sympathetic, some skeptical. "I was scared and selfish, and I chose survival over justice. That's the truth. I'm not proud of it, but that's what happened." Valdez nodded. No further questions. The cross-examination was worse. Thorne's lawyer, a young public defender named Kevin Chen, who looked exhausted and outmatched, tried to suggest Sarah had known all along, had been complicit, had only come forward when she thought she'd be caught. Isn't it true, Miss Duval, that you lived with my client for 6 months? Yes. And in that time you never once suspected something was wrong? I suspected things were wrong. I just didn't suspect he was a serial killer. But you saw the locked shed, the way he discouraged you from going to certain areas, the late-night absences. Yes. And yet you stayed. Sarah met his eyes. Yes, I stayed, because I loved him, or I thought I did. And when you love someone, you explain away the red flags. You tell yourself there's a reasonable explanation, that you're being paranoid. Her voice hardened. That's what abusers count on, that people who love them will make excuses, will stay quiet, will blame themselves instead of the person actually doing harm. Chen opened his mouth, closed it. No further questions. Sarah stepped down, legs shaking, and walked past Thorne's table without looking at him. But she felt his eyes on her back, felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. In the gallery, Marcus waited. She sat beside him, and he took her hand, squeezed once. "You did good," he whispered. She'd done what she had to. Whether it was good remained to be seen. The prosecution called 18 witnesses over the next 3 days. Families of the victims, forensic experts, the hikers who'd found Jennifer Ashford's remains, Morrison, who walked the jury through the evidence found at the cabin, the DNA matches, the journal entries, the careful documentation of murders spanning 7 years. The defense called 2 witnesses, a psychiatrist who testified about Thorne's traumatic childhood, and Thorne himself. Sarah couldn't watch. Left the courtroom while he testified, sat in the hallway with Marcus, and tried not to think about what he was saying in there, what lies he was telling to make himself sympathetic. When Morrison came out 2 hours later, his face said everything. "He cried," Morrison said, disgusted. Talked about his father, about how he tried to stop but couldn't control the urges. Said he loved you. That letting you go was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Did the jury buy it? Some of them looked moved. But Valdez is good. She'll tear him apart in closing arguments. Sarah nodded, felt numb. "Can we go? I need air." Marcus drove her back to the motel. She sat in the passenger seat watching the mountains roll past and thought about how Thorne had said he loved her. Maybe he did. Maybe that was the truth. Maybe love and monstrosity could exist in the same person, twisted together until you couldn't separate them. That somehow made it worse. The jury deliberated for 16 hours. Sarah spent that time in Morrison's office, drinking bad coffee and watching the clock and trying not to throw up. Marcus sat beside her, solid and present. Morrison fielded phone calls and tried to project confidence. "It's a lot of evidence," he kept saying. "They'll convict. They have to." But they didn't have to. Sarah had learned that much. Juries were human. Humans were unpredictable. Humans could be swayed by tears and childhood trauma and a man who looked sad enough in an orange jumpsuit. When Morrison's phone finally rang, Sarah's heart stopped. "They've reached a verdict," he said. "Let's go." The courtroom was packed. Press, victim families, townspeople who'd followed the case. Sarah sat in the front row, Marcus on one side, Morrison's wife on the other. The jury filed in. Wouldn't look at Thorne. That was supposed to be a good sign, but Sarah couldn't let herself hope. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and no-nonsense eyes, called the proceedings to order. Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood. Older man, farmer's hands, kind face. "We have, Your Honor." "On the count of murder in the first degree, how do you find?" "Guilty?" The word echoed. Sarah felt it like a physical blow, relief and grief and vindication all at once. "On the count of murder in the first degree for the second victim, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of murder in the first degree for the third victim." 18 times, 18 guilty verdicts, one for each life he'd taken. When it was over, when the judge had thanked the jury and set a sentencing date and banged her gavel, Sarah sat frozen. Couldn't move, couldn't process. It was over. He'd spend the rest of his life in prison, would die there, would never hurt anyone else. The families around her were crying, hugging, finding whatever closure this could provide. Sarah just felt empty. Marcus put his arm around her. "Come on, let's get out of here." They stood, started toward the exit, and that's when she heard it. "Claire." She stopped. Should have kept walking. But her body betrayed her, turning toward his voice. Thorne stood at the defense table, marshals on either side ready to take him away. He looked at her across the courtroom, and his eyes were wet. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." Sarah stared at him. This man who'd killed 18 people, who'd fed her their remains, who'd claimed to love her while destroying her from the inside out. And she realized his apology meant nothing, less than nothing, because he was sorry he'd been caught, sorry he was going to prison, maybe even sorry he'd hurt her. But he wasn't sorry for what he was, for what he'd done. Not really. People like him never were. "Goodbye, Thorne," she said, not angry, not sad, just done. She turned and walked out of the courthouse, Marcus beside her, and didn't look back. Behind her, she heard the marshals leading Thorne away, heard the families talking, heard Morrison saying something to Valdez about appeals and sentencing. But Sarah was already gone, already moving forward, into sunlight, into the rest of her life, into whatever came next. 3 years later, Sarah, she'd legally changed her name, kept the one that felt more like her, stood on the porch of the small house she and Marcus had bought outside Sealy Lake. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that needed updating. But it had a view of the mountains and enough land that she could breathe without feeling closed in. Marcus was inside making dinner, actual dinner, not stew, never stew, and the smell of garlic and tomatoes drifted through the open door. She'd gone back to teaching, started slow, substitute work, then a part-time position at the local elementary school. The kids didn't know about her past, didn't know about Thorne or the trial or any of it. They just knew Ms. Sarah, who read to them after lunch and always had Band-Aids for scraped knees. She still had nightmares sometimes, still checked locks twice before bed, still felt her pulse spike when someone came up behind her unexpectedly, but she'd learned to live with it, the way Marcus had said, making it quieter instead of making it gone. Therapy helped. So did time. So did building a life that was hers, shaped by her choices, filled with people she trusted. Morrison still called every few months. Thorne was in a supermax in Colorado. No possibility of parole. No contact with the outside world. Slowly fading into irrelevance. Some of the victim families had reached out over the years, wanting to thank her, wanting to tell her it wasn't her fault, wanting to share stories about the people they'd lost. Sarah had read every letter, kept them in a box under the bed, reminders that she'd done the right thing, eventually. "Dinner's ready," Marcus called from inside. Sarah took one last look at the mountains, darkening now as the sun set, shadows creeping up their slopes, and thought about the woman she'd been at that book fair, so desperate to escape her old life that she walked straight into hell. That woman was gone now, transformed by fire into someone harder, someone wiser, someone who understood that survival wasn't the same as living, and that living meant accepting the mess and the fear and the uncertainty instead of running from it. She'd survived Thorn. She'd survived the trial. She'd survived her own shame and guilt and the weight of all those lives. And now, finally, incredibly, she was learning to do more than just survive. She was learning to live. Sarah turned and walked inside, where Marcus was setting the table, and the house smelled like garlic and home, and she closed the door behind her, locked it, checked it once, twice. Then she let it go, let the fear be quiet for one more night, and sat down to dinner with someone she trusted, someone who'd seen her at her worst and stayed anyway, someone who understood that healing wasn't linear, that bad days would come, that the past never really left, but that tomorrow still came, and the day after that, and the one after that, and each day was a choice to keep going, to keep building, to keep being more than what had been done to her. Outside, the mountains stood silent in the dark, keeping their secrets, and inside, Sarah ate dinner and laughed at Marcus's terrible joke and thought about the students she'd see tomorrow and the life she was creating day by day, choice by choice. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even easy, but it was hers. And that, finally, impossibly, was enough. The end. Hey, it's the Midnight Narrator here. If this story kept you company through the darkness, if Sarah's journey meant something to you, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. It helps more than you know. And remember, survival is the beginning, not the end. Keep going. Keep choosing. Keep becoming who you're meant to be. Until next time, sleep well, or at least sleep knowing you're not alone. Good night.